Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. As you could tell by my voice, it was a very late night last night. I am not going to pat myself on the back, maybe a little bit, because the chart that I came up with was indeed the chart that, for the most part, won, with the exception of one state that I wasn't sure about. As you know, Donald Trump is now the president elect of the United States of America. He will be your next president. And you can imagine there was a fair bit of hand waving and teary eyes on many of the networks like MSNBC or Jonathan Capehart, who seems utterly mystified that Donald Trump could win the race. The wild part about it is I couldn't see how Kamala Harris could win it. When I went to the map and did my map last night, and I did the map just before the election started, my map looked like this. I assumed, and I really thought Pennsylvania was going to go to Trump. So I gave Trump Pennsylvania. I wasn't sure about Michigan. I wanted Michigan. I wanted her to lose Michigan. I deeply wanted her to lose Michigan. And the reason is obvious, right? Your administration is backing a genocide. Not only is it backing a genocide, it's giving money, weapons, guns, missiles, intelligence, political and diplomatic support. It's doing all of that. It is impossible for that to take place without the Biden administration and the Harris administration doing it. Okay. With the large Muslim population in Michigan, I wanted them to give an FU to their campaign. You didn't care about all of us that were dying. You didn't even want us to have a space on stage at the DNC convention. Okay, fair enough. You believe you could do this without us. God bless you. Do it without us. Michigan seems to be going red. 97% reporting Donald Trump up 2. Trump up 2. And of course, he took Pennsylvania. And as I kept telling the audience last night, if Trump takes Pennsylvania, this race was over with. Now, I pointed that out early on. The DNC, Capehart, MSNBC, they seem to be mystified by the whole thing. Just weird. I want to bring on my guests. I'm going to have a conversation about the election and about everything that's been taking place. And I want to get the perspective. I want to get the perspective outside the country. 1 second. There we are. Yeah, I want to get perspective outside the country. So we are joined with Alan McLeod. And just to give his bio, Alan McLeod is a senior staff writer for Mint Press News and author of 2 books, Bad News from Venezuela, 20 Years of Fake News and Misreporting, Propaganda in the Information Age, and Still Manufacturing Consent. He is a fantastic person to have this conversation with. Alan, man, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning? You doing all right? Wait a minute, 1 second. There we are. You doing all right this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, I guess. Frankly, I think we expected this result. A lot of us anyway, outside of the world, when we're looking at elections, looking at polls, looking at what Harris has offered for the rest of the world, for America. So honestly, any result could have happened, but this was definitely one that was on the cards.
Yeah. It's funny. When I did the map last night, I could not see a clear path for Harris to win. I could see multiple pathways for Trump to win. Harris had to go through a very specific pathway. And even weirder, this is an election where it seems that the Republican has won even the popular vote. Apparently, there were many districts where there were no change. Effectively, she couldn't make any gains on Joe Biden. Um, I'm curious, you're in Europe right now. What are they thinking about this election, considering they woke up with Donald Trump basically being the new president of the US?
Sure. Well, I guess it depends who you mean by Europe. If you look at politicians, it's the same story really as 2016. So, for example, William Hague, who is was the British Foreign Secretary for a number of years, the Conservative British Foreign Secretary, I should add as well, he was saying that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, that he must be stopped at all costs, that he threatens to break up NATO, to he's a threat to the established world order, to the global system more generally. And we could see that from more establishment politicians all, beating the drum that the United States must vote for Kamala Harris. Certainly, Donald Trump is not particularly popular across Europe, but again, Europeans looking at this really not really that surprised. Um, Having said that, all of these people who were only a few hours ago telling everyone that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, I now see are
Mhm.
congratulating Trump and are saying, we welcome him into the White House. We're looking forward to strengthening the partnership, the Atlantic Alliance, etc. So really, one of the only good things to come out of this election is to really see how two-faced a lot of the politicians in Europe are. The ones that are saying, he's such a threat, and then immediately as he gets in, they're saying, welcome Donald Trump, it's good to see you back, etc. So yeah, I mean, I guess the reaction in Europe is a big sigh, saying, oh, we expected this. But after 4 years of complete inaction on climate, on complete inaction on the homelessness crisis, on inequality getting worse, on the housing crisis, particularly for younger people in America, getting worse.
Yeah.
For a year of bombing Gaza into smithereens, I think we have to expect this to happen. We can't imagine that the American public are not going to vote for change, even if it is a terrible, crummy change that's being offered. And so I think in Europe, most people saw this as a distinct possibility.
Well, I saw it as a distinct possibility. I mean, my chart, for the most part, is the one that won, with the exception of Michigan. I wasn't sure where Michigan was going to go. The reality of it is, as you're looking around the globe, or as you're looking around the US, and you're going from just saying state, 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 who gets what, it really did boil down for me to Pennsylvania and Michigan. If Harris could take both, she has a much better chance of winning. If she can't take both, then she was going to flat out lose. And that is effectively what took place. Obviously, Michigan was the Muslim vote and the Arab vote, and the level of anger that was associated with the Biden administration for supporting a genocide and even giving it political cover on top of the money. There's that. You're also right that the overwhelming majority of the public wanted something different. And you got like 50 to 70% that said we want change. And Kamala Harris had made it very clear, I am not different. I can't think of anything I would have done differently, nor can I think of anything I would do differently. Okay, well, that's problematic in regards to a race. Do you think, and especially on the issue of Ukraine, I'm fascinated by that. So the Biden administration said, we're with you for as long as it takes. This was Joe Biden's war in real terms. Is Europe going to get stuck with the bag if Donald Trump switches focus to something else? What are your thoughts? And I would imagine this has to be something that Europe is thinking about.
Well, I guess it depends. Your question, if you get stuck with it, if Trump wins, I guess it really depends whether Trump puts his money where his mouth is. He
Right.
makes a lot of anti-war comments when he's out of office, and even sometimes when he's in office as well. But when you actually look at his record, he's not
Mhm.
quite as anti-war as a lot of people think. He was supplying the Saudis with gigantic amounts of weapons so they could bomb Yemen for years.
Yeah.
He dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. That was the largest non-nuclear weapon ever used in the world. He wanted to invade Venezuela, and he had to get talked out of it by the people in the room. For example, he ramped up sanctions against Cuba. The military budget increased under his leadership. So he certainly makes a lot of comments about ending wars in the Middle East, ending wars in
Right.
Ukraine. But when he actually gets in, that's really where the proof in the pudding is. So if Trump does indeed start to pull out of Ukraine as he's intimated, then yeah, Europe certainly will be stuck with it. And quite honestly, the European armies are not strong enough and do not have the resources
Oh,
to continue to prosecute this war for 4 more years without the significant support of the United States, who, let's be real, are actually leading the campaign against Russia. There are no gigantic European armies anymore, save from in Ukraine and Russia, and there really isn't the appetite in in across Europe to really go to war with the largest country in Europe, who is also their biggest energy supplier. So really, if Donald Trump is genuine in the sense that he really wants to end the war in Ukraine, well, if the United States pulls out, then the rest of NATO will too, and that means that Ukraine will be left to its fate, whatever that is.
well, there's the other issue associated with it, dealing with European Parliament, right? So when I was in Europe, I was covering the European elections. The company sent me to cover the European elections. And one of the things I noticed was that there was a sea change in regards to the political wins. I mean, you had France, with Macron's party just losing outright, him having a snap election, believing that there's no way that the right-wing party could have actually won it. Well, the right-wing party was that popular. You have Germany, where it seems like Schultz is going to be out on his ass coming up next year. You have Slovakia that is basically gone to, let's say, a skeptical Ukraine position. There's a belief that Austria is going to go in that direction. And of course, we have Viktor Orban. Are you seeing a changeover in the politics of Europe where they're realizing that this war has effectively made them poorer and all of this stuff is being done at the behest of the US? Give me your thoughts. What's going on in Europe around this?
Well, I'd agree with you in the sense that I think it's pretty clear that the war in Ukraine is making Europe poorer. As I said, we're losing our number one supply of energy, which is Russia, which
Yeah.
supplied, I believe, 50% of the oil and 25% of the gas to Europe, which means we're now bringing over boatloads of extremely expensive liquefied natural gas from North America, far more expensive, which means that European manufacturers, particularly in Germany, are much, much less competitive than they should be because their costs of production have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Not only that, the United States is quietly under the table trying to poach a lot of European businesses. We're seeing the Biden administration give all sorts of financial incentives for European companies to move over to the United States. And yeah, so effectively stealing those businesses. So what we're seeing right now is the wide-scale deindustrialization of Europe, and that cannot be good for the long-term future of the continent. However, when you actually turn on televisions here or read newspapers, very, very few articles or segments are actually dealing with this. The big picture is
Really?
not being talked about. So it's not really clear whether the public are completely aware of what's going on, and that's why they're voting there. I think really the big picture is that across the West, we've had decades of neoliberalism, which has whittled out the social safety net we've got here, which has
Mhm.
led to even worse conditions to work in. The chances of European people, like Americans, young Americans, owning a home is going down and down and down. And Europeans are essentially seeing their lives and not pan out how they wanted to. They're seeing their parents' lives or their grandparents' lives or where they were when
Yeah.
they were our age, and they're comparing it to them and thinking we're getting a really bad deal here. And that is ultimately why the last couple of decades we're seeing slow but very real emergence of right-wing populist forces, the return of fascism in Europe, deeply, deeply reactionary sentiments, even among young people, but especially around middle-aged and older people in
Mhm.
Europe. And that bodes very, very badly for the future of this continent. I'm extremely worried about where we're going.
Well, they don't seem to see it, though. I mean, even when I was there, and I would say, "Hey, do you think America has any influence in their politics?" And they would be like, "No, we don't see how America is, affecting us." And you would point out, okay, well, you realize in the Syrian war that the reason why you have so many people that came from the Middle East was because the U.S. was trying to overthrow countries, and it was affecting your politics. Or in this case, with the Ukraine thing, it's like you get that you're paying 5 times more for energy now, and that you've effectively deindustrialized your countries. I mean, for God's sake, Germany is astonishing. I mean, they have basically gone into a recession with their industrial capacity being underwater as a result of the amount of money that they have to pay for energy and whatnot. And you're right, the US has been trying to get companies from those places. I guess my thing is, has the political space become aware that that's an issue? And has political space tried to, let's say, accommodate the difference in point of view, meaning the fact that the people's point of view are beginning to change on the war and change of their living situation?
Well, I'd like to say yes, but I think the true answer is not really. Honestly, I think those sorts of positions are quite marginal in polite conversation. It's going to take us many years to catch up to the reality of what's going
Yeah,
on here in Europe. And I don't think there's really big forces talking in the same way that you're talking, Jamal. Unfortunately, that means that we are probably going to be making some very bad decisions as a continent for the next few years.
yeah,
I don't think there's that great awareness of the change that's happening in Europe. But I would say that, if you go to travel to other continents, particularly Asia, you can see things developing rapidly. You
yeah,
can see infrastructure being put in. You can see people uh, jumping up the property ladder. You can see how conditions is just improving vastly for people. How in a generation people are going from mud huts to skyscrapers all across East Asia. In Europe, there's stagnation, there's decline, and that has been going on since the 1970s. But really, since the 2008 financial crisis, particularly in the UK, that process has been accelerated. And unfortunately, there's not really widespread political movement that's really handling that.
right.
Generally the far right forces whisper at those sorts of things, but their solution to that and their highlighting of the problem, they always identify immigrants or Muslims or any other small marginalized group as the real reason for why we can't afford a house anymore. They say all these Muslim refugees are coming over to our countries and they're being put first in line to have all the great subsidized
Yep,
government housing. And that's why you're not getting your thing. And ultimately, that idea, that notion is completely false. But if that's the only notion and the only explanation for why people's lives are not as good as they should be, then
mhm,
some people will be attracted to that. And ultimately, there is not this widespread movement identifying neoliberal capitalism as the source of people's problems.
right.
And that ultimately means that we are stuck in the position that we are in, which is a terrible political situation. And it's not completely dissimilar to what we have in the United States, where we have two parties basically saying that it's going to be business as usual. But except with the Republicans, they are at least promising white Americans that they will crack down on immigrants, on
Yeah,
non-white people, and restore what W.E.B. Du Bois called the psychological wage of whiteness to give that sort of prestige to ordinary people. And that is something that they're at least offering, that Trump is offering. But ultimately, we need a widespread populist leftist movement that identifies the real source of the problem, not these phony racists that are popping up all over the West saying that your problems are the brown person next to you or down the street.
yeah, agreed. I mean, for Donald Trump, he spent so much time bashing immigrants, attacking immigrants. They're the problem for this, they're the problem for that, et cetera, et cetera. And I noticed it was a similar energy in Europe. By the same token, though, I've noticed also that liberals tend to be in a bubble. They don't understand how their policy or how the things that they say and do turn people off. And that is true in Europe, where if you ask people, well, why are people voting for these other parties? It was like, well, they're racist and sexist and xenophobic. And you get a similar answer here in the US. Well, the people just don't know any better. It's just misinformation or they're sexist and et cetera, et cetera. Jonathan Capehart went on TV and said, well, I guess this means that America doesn't care about democracy. Now, this is pretty astonishing considering Kamala Harris didn't win one vote in a primary, and yet he's screaming about America doesn't care about democracy. Do you think that Europe at some point, especially when they realize, oh my God, we're getting poorer, and oh my God, the US is going to use us as a platform if there's a fight with Russia? Meaning, does Europe realizing they are being taken advantage of um, as they kind of latch themselves onto the hegemon, or still blissfully unaware?
I think if you talk to people, individual people,
Mhm.
just on the street or in your homes, and you start to engage them in this kind of debate, there is a sense that something is going very badly wrong in
Yeah.
Ukraine and that we're, as you said, holding the bag. However, that is not being articulated in the media or by any large political movement. We do have
I see.
some Ukraine skeptic parties, but they're not actually making that argument cogently and clearly like you are. So ultimately, as I said, we're very much in our nascent stages of anti-war activism in Europe. That movement,
Yeah.
I'm sure, will grow as the campaign and the conflict continues. But ultimately, Europeans aren't feeling it directly. They're only feeling it indirectly in the sense that their energy bills are going up, or perhaps they're finding it harder to get a job, or food prices are going up. But actually linking that specifically to the war in Russia, to the war in Ukraine, is not
Not so
really
much.
happening across Europe. And so ultimately, I think
Well, it was
it's not a
Alan.
very
I'm sorry
good
to interrupt. They
message
were
for Europeans.
reporting that they were trying to Trump-proof Ukraine. That they were looking at this notion that if Donald Trump wins, that Donald Trump wanted to pull out, and that they were trying to find a way to get money to ensure that the money continues to Ukraine. Were they able to pull that off?
Yeah, I don't know how that's actually going to work, and I don't really know how much, as I said, how much pressure Trump is going to apply
Right.
to try to pull out
Right.
of Ukraine. I mean, it might be a complete canard, and we'll just be talking about this in 4 years on your show about
Yeah.
how is the next Democratic president, are they going to end this war in Ukraine or whatever. So yeah, that has been a topic of discussion for a number of months actually in Europe among
Mm.
high European leaders, among NATO officials, in the Council of Europe, etc. Talking about how they are going to try to Trump-proof this Ukraine war by locking in all the money and all the resources and all the arms by signing the deals and sending them over so that at
Right.
least Ukraine can be bought a little bit of time. But if you do read the elite press, a lot of them are starting to admit that this war in Ukraine is not going as well as they thought it was. Ukraine is not
Right.
making any gains against Russia, in fact, quite the opposite, which means that frankly, coming over to the table to negotiate would probably be better sooner rather than later for the Europeans. But
Mm.
at the same time, they dug themselves into such a hole, painted themselves into such a corner with their rhetoric that so many of them are saying, we'll fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. However, we are reaching a stage where we're getting to the point where we are getting towards the last Ukrainian. It's very hard
Right.
for Ukrainians to actually find men to go and fight. We're seeing stories about women fighting, about teenagers fighting. Will it be fight Ukraine, fight Russia to the last Polish, fight Russia to the last Slovakian? I really don't think that there's any kind of appetite among the public in Europe for a draft for a massive war against Russia that will take years. And that's the sort of thing that will lead to increasing cracks among European unity and might even lead, in some situations, to the entire breakup of the European project.
Oh, that is a fascinating point. I mean, because the way they treated Orban has been just ghastly. They've acted as if he wasn't a member of the European Union. They've ostracized him for wanting peace, etc. I guess the question is, I mean, does this challenge this notion of either NATO or Europe? From your point of view, how do you think this ends in regards to the Ukrainian war? Do you think they collapse on the battlefield? Do you think they come to some kind of peace agreement? I don't know how they would do a peace agreement, consider what they did with Minsk 1 and 2. Or do you think it's a situation where they literally fight to the last Ukrainian, where they force Russia to basically take the entire country and then they turn it into a guerrilla war? What do you think this ends?
Well, there's only two ways that wars end ultimately. It's either with total victory of one side or through
Yeah,
some sort of negotiation. And
yeah,
I think the second option would be vastly superior, no doubt about it. The problem with that is that we could have had negotiations, and we did have negotiations, as you just intimated, before the war even started, talking about Minsk 1 and 2. And we also
mhm.
could have had negotiations weeks after, a
Istanbul.
negotiated settlement, weeks after the war started. Zelensky has apparently already pretty much signed a deal with Putin, which
Mhm.
which would have ended the war pretty quickly and without too many lives lost. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom flew over to Kiev and talked to Zelensky and said, under no circumstances should
Yeah.
he be signing this. Put all sorts of I guess the polite word would be incentives, the impolite word would be threats towards Zelensky to continue this, saying that, we're going to fight with you, we're going to supply you with whatever you need, ginning up his confidence, etc. And so now we're in a situation where a couple of years out, we've had hundreds of thousands of casualties. Ukraine has been destroyed. Russia has taken more territory. Millions of Ukrainians have left their home country. Perhaps none
Yeah.
of them, perhaps not that many of them will return. The country is a shadow of what it was. Um, how will this pan out? I mean, I guess right now the the tactic for NATO and the West more generally is just keep the thing going and see if something changes. Sometimes in politics, just surviving is a pretty good tactic to just keep it going and see if something changes in the world, some sort of sea change, some sort of environmental event, a political event, an economic event that might change things in your favor. But I don't see one of those coming along too quickly.
Yeah.
Russia has not been destroyed by sanctions as people like Lloyd Austin, people like Joe Biden were claiming it would be. In fact, it's actually in some ways in a stronger position than it was in 2022. I mean, sanctions have harmed Russia in some ways, but it's also allowed Russia to develop more meaningful relationships with Asian
Right.
countries, economically,
Right.
politically, and militarily. And so it doesn't really seem like Russia is on the verge of petering out in this conflict. It actually seems like it's much more likely that the Europeans and the Americans are going to lose heart, which means that the Ukrainians might actually just be betrayed after years of fighting. And they'll be thinking about that and saying, well, what were we fighting for if you were just going to betray us like you betrayed the Kurds or you betrayed so many of your other former allies? And that's the story for a lot of people worldwide is if you start dancing with the devil, meaning the United States, you got to wait till the tune stops.
Man, and you know what's wild? I used to ask that question like a year ago. What was this all for? Like you're gonna lose all of these people, all of these people are getting killed for this kind of geopolitical expansionism. And at the end of the day, you lose. And not just lose. The Russian military went from 150,000 to a million men. They're producing more than all of NATO combined. And it's clear as day at this point that Ukraine has no capacity to win it, even the New York Times points it out. Last question before I let you go. BRICS. Uh, the US has did everything in their power to basically ignore the fact that BRICS was going on. Now you've had more than half of the globe represented at that BRICS summit. And you have all of these other countries, including Turkey, NATO nation, trying to get into BRICS. How did Europe deal with this? I mean, is Europe paying attention to this? Have they said anything about it? I mean, because at the end of the day, while they're being deindustrialized and while their standard of living is going down, all of these countries are on the ascendancy, basically bringing in the global south with this kind of new way of going about world affairs. How's Europe accommodating this?
Well, first, you have to say there's a massive sea change geopolitically and economically going on in the
Yeah,
world right now. We are seeing Asian countries, as I said earlier, rise from very low levels to the point where they are challenging Europe and the United States for standard of living and certainly economic power. I would just suggest to anyone to look around their room right now and look at how many things are made in the United States and then look at how many things are made in China. And I'm telling you, virtually everything you see will be made in Asia, from your clothes to your even to the electronic devices in your room, maybe even your car,
yeah,
etc. So it's clear that Asia has become the workshop of the world, the manufacturer of the world. And this is playing out geopolitically. And one of the things that's going on is BRICS. BRICS is an attempt to politicize and make an economic union out of these emerging countries that don't want to be completely dominated by the United States and Europe anymore. And how
right.
the US and Europe are dealing with that, for the most part, it's ignoring it. Most people, I think, if you talk to people on the street, they would not know what BRICS is about. They would not really know anything about the sort of geopolitics that's going on. In terms of the leaders, well, they are quietly saying that we have to try and stop the rise of China, the rise of Russia. We have to put a stranglehold on this. Europe, like the United States, is very much interested in creating an Asian NATO to try to
Right.
encircle China, to try to suffocate it. There are all sorts of tariffs going off on Chinese vehicles and Chinese electronics to try to ban them in the West. And thinking about companies like Huawei, companies like BYD, the car manufacturer. Those
Mm.
things are absolutely ubiquitous if you travel in Africa or Latin America or Asia. But here in Europe or over in the US, a lot of people don't even know what those brands are, even though they're some of the most recognizable things in the world. So, yeah, I guess we're seeing a real realignment. And you see that with the United Nations votes as well. We see the
Yeah.
United States and Europe, and maybe a couple of other countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, voting one way, and the rest of the world voting another. And that's how I see BRICS. It's kind of an attempt to forge an economic and semi-political union to try to push for the interests of the majority of the people in the world, or at least the countries that represent the majority of the people in the world. There's huge contradictions within BRICS. You know, if you look at how China is governed internally versus Iran or South
Right.
Africa, they're very, very different countries. But they do agree that they are completely sick and tired of the US dominated global order. And so we're seeing one being born out right now. How that actually plays out is going to be one of the most important questions of the 21st century, to see what exactly the world will look at like in 30, 40, 50 years. BRICS is going to have a huge impact on that question.
Yeah, thousand percent agree. I mean, ultimately, I really do think we're looking at a new norm, like kind of like after the Second World War, where all of these countries came together, especially the colonial powers, and figuring out, okay, what is the world going to look like? And I get the sense that BRICS is an attempt at a reorganization with this idea of trying to make the world more fair. You know, how can we include Africa? How can we include the global South? How can we bring these countries in where we're dealing with each other as equals, as opposed to having a hegemon? I really do think this is a new norm. Alan, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me. Just to give people a heads up, Alan McLeod, he is senior staff writer for Met Press News and author of the books Bad News for Venezuela, 20 Years of Fake News and Misreporting, and Propaganda in the Information Age, Still Manufacturing Consent. You can follow Alan on Twitter at Alan R. McLeod, and you can find his writing on Mint Press News. Alan, is there anywhere else that they can find you, just in case I might have missed something? This might be somewhat of an old bio.
Yeah, sure. So Twitter, Instagram, alan.r.mcleod. Obviously, Mint Press News is where I publish my investigations. And then you can find me on Telegram as well. Just search for my name.
Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me. Alan McLeod. Excellent. All right. So I am going to take a quick break. And I'm going to be back in a moment. I've been having difficulty trying to find a guest for 8 o'clock. I wanted Malik to join, but I got to be honest, I don't know if he's going to come here at 8 in the morning, especially after probably having a long night on election night. I am dragging ass a little bit, but I have a coffee that I paid way too much for to get here. And I'm going to consume that caffeine when it gets here in order to give myself a bit of an energy boost. I hope you guys are doing all right. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Donald Trump is your new president-elect. Liberals are going to be shell-shocked. They're going to be confused. They're not going to understand what happened. They're going to say, but Kamala Harris is great. They're going to say, but Donald Trump is incompetent. And they're going to have all of these words. And I suspect they're going to say blacks were insufficiently loyal. Muslims didn't come out for Kamala Harris because of the genocide. They're probably not even going to call it a genocide. They're just going to say Muslim didn't come out for Harris. They're going to say it made it rain that night. Somebody got smoke in their eyes. Somebody tripped as they were going across the street and just went home. They're going to have all of these excuses, as opposed to really having some level of soul searching as to how on earth do you lose to a man that has been impeached twice, that had 90 indictments hanging over his head, that has been convicted in court for being a sexual abuser, that is a convicted felon at this point. How on earth could you not mount an argument or a case that showed you in a better light than that guy? How do you do that? Now, from my point of view, that requires introspection. That requires an autopsy. How did we fail? And an honest autopsy. Not this, well, the Russians got involved, or the Chinese got involved, or people were just misinformed. Not that. You need to understand why you are perceived in a particular way. How does a billionaire who had been paid by other billionaires, how is he able to assume this position as being the fighter for working man? How does he do that? You're the Democratic Party, you're supposed to be the party of unions, right? How does he take that spot? That needs to be a soul-searching question. That's not Capehart or some of these other talking heads on MSNBC blaming the public. Oh, they're Nazis. Oh, they don't believe in democracy. Oh, they're this, they're that. It's not that. There's something inherently wrong. And I'm saying you had a political party that has spent the last year backing a genocide and arguing that the concerns of tens of thousands of children being wiped away and slaughtered with our tax dollars and our money, that we shouldn't care about that we should care about abortions, and we should care about inflation being high. And while I understand that people are going to have concerns about the economy, or for that matter, their abortions, you should also give a shit about the fact that they're slaughtering people en masse. How does that not matter to you? Hence, the fact that Michigan told the Democratic Party to fuck off. I love it. I told you, if there's one state that I wanted to go to somebody other than Harris, it was Michigan. And it seems that they delivered. So the calculus that you could ignore the Muslim vote, that you could back a genocide, that you can give money and funding to a genocide, that you can hire sociopaths to go out there and tell people that really it's not that bad, it's okay, where you can get other Muslims to come out and say, hey, I know they're killing a lot of people and it looks bad and all, but I'm Muslim, take my advice, it's not that big of a deal, you need to vote for Kamala Harris. Apparently that didn't work. That didn't work. Abandoning the left apparently didn't work. Running around the country with Liz Cheney apparently didn't work. As magnificently unpopular as Liz Cheney was, I mean, the woman got beat tremendously. You're going to take a Cheney and use a Cheney as an idea of a beacon of democracy. Are you out of your mind? Are you out of your mind? But this was the campaign she decided to run. It has a Hillary Clinton energy to it. Whereas Donald Trump every so often will talk about making America better again, cutting down inflation, getting rid of the wars. Kamala Harris spent her entire time talking about Donald Trump. A campaign about joy. And then essentially it became, well, he's a Nazi, he's a racist, he's a fascist. And as I pointed out to you, when campaigns start talking that way, when they get that level of caustic, that level of hysteria in their language, that means there's something wrong. Campaigns don't typically go there right off the bat. They tend to go there when they get desperate. And when you get Joe Biden calling her supporters trash, or Trump supporters trash, when you get them trying to say that Trump supporters are Nazis, when you're trying to say that Trump is a Nazi that wanted to put Liz Cheney against a wall and shoot her in the face, all of this hyperbolic rhetoric, and didn't line up, A, to reality, and B, Harris couldn't beat that Hitler, apparently, and doesn't even seem like she's going to win the popular vote. That's humiliating. That is deeply, deeply humiliating. And whereas I wish there was some level of introspection, there was some level of trying to understand how did this happen, and try to understand it in a way that goes beyond just those people are sexist, racist, bigoted, and misinformed. That insulates you from reality. Meaning that point of view allows you to blame any and everybody else. And I'm saying that blame, when Hillary Clinton failed, didn't help the party at all. And I'm saying the same thing here. There's something wrong with your party. The idea that you would lose to Trump and lose the popular vote, you can make excuses and say, well, we didn't have a primary. But I would argue that not having a primary is a symptom of the larger problem. Meaning, A, you hid a man who was out of his goddamn mind, and was obviously so. And on top of hiding that guy, when it came up, it seemed like Joe Biden was trying to win the race and then wedge Kamala Harris in. Okay, well, after the debate, that was untenable, in which case Kamala Harris had to come out. Biden should have remained a transitional president and allowed the primary to play out. Democrats didn't want to do that. They also, if you remember, changed the primary schedule to make it better for Joe Biden. Basically, they make him look better, in which case they got rid of New Hampshire and even moved Iowa out the way in order to put South Carolina first. They were doing all of this stuff as opposed to letting the process play out. Super delegates, another issue. I'm saying that all of these things bespeak of an inherent problem with the party that they have insulated themselves from by just saying everybody's misinformed, everybody's racist, and what we need to do is somehow change Twitter or change the First Amendment so people, will be more in line with our point of view. I'm saying that's a problem. I'm saying all of it is a problem. In fact, it's terrifying. It's fucking terrifying. I'm going to take a quick break. And when I come back, I'm going to show you some of the things that were taking place on media last night as Donald Trump was creating a chart that looked like this. My name is Jamal Thomas. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. If you guys dig this content, give it a like, meaning hit the like button. Also, you can subscribe. We're trying to get to 40,000 by Christmas, and I need your assistance and help to do that. So definitely, if you dig the content, subscribe to the content, like the content, hit the notification bell, leave a comment if it's something that engages or entertains you. 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. This face, this voice will be right here in your ear. So definitely, if you find yourself coming here often, subscribe. If you really dig the content, you can always support the content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, bigoted, sexist, etc., etc., etc. And I do want to get your take on this race, meaning if any of you guys have comments or something like that, I'll take a moment to read your chats or read your messages. A fascinating day. And I want to go into the meltdowns that apparently have been taking place of people being baffled. And again, I don't know why they were baffled. When you look at my chart, I came up with this. I assumed Trump was going to get Nevada and Arizona. That's not really, a huge, magnificent leap. I assumed he was going to get Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, because I consider Georgia a fluke last time around. If you remember, last time there was COVID, and Donald Trump disincentivized people from going for early voting. So you ended up getting a lot of those people having to go on election day, which was one of the reasons that he lost. This time that was an issue. He sent those people to the voting polls early. Vote early and often. All right. So the only confusion I really had was whether or not Pennsylvania and Michigan was going to go to Harris or Trump. I assumed, at least I thought, had a strong feeling that he was going to get Pennsylvania. All of the polling at that point had Trump leading all the way up into the race. Michigan, I wasn't sure. Michigan was a wild card to me. I think I ended up giving it to Harris because at a certain point, it didn't really matter anymore. If he took Pennsylvania, then this race was over with. At that point, it was just a mathematical thing of what the number was actually going to be. There were pathways for Harris, but she would have had to take Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And she would have also needed to take some of the split votes in order to make that work. My chart was damn close to how it turned out. In fact, the only one I missed was Michigan. Only one I missed was Michigan. I did my chart before the election took place, and so even online. I did it online for everybody to see. Again, my political acumen is pretty damn good. And it's not because I'm special. It's just I don't have a bias. I don't have a dog in this hunt. And because I don't have a dog in this hunt, I see things a little bit clearer. With one catch. As I pointed out to the audience, I really wanted her to lose Michigan. Oh, you have no idea how much I wanted her to lose Michigan. Even if Kamala Harris won the election, I wanted her to lose Michigan. And again, the reason is pretty straightforward. You have a Muslim community that typically votes Democrat, that you fundamentally ignored. And not just ignored, you told them that they need to take the burden. They need to basically take the L, that your administration can be perfectly okay backing a genocide. And despite the fact that its people are being slaughtered and killed, that they should still turn around and vote for Kamala Harris. Because Donald Trump, you can't trust Donald Trump. It's not about trust. It's about not backing a political party that's backing a genocide. And they make it very clear in stone. You can either back a genocide or you can win a race. You can't do both. It needs to be made blisteringly clear that if a Democratic candidate or any candidate is going to run in a race after backing and supporting a genocide, that they will lose. That needs to be blisteringly clear. I don't even know why this even needs to be an argument at this point. Genocide should be a red line. Full stop. And for whatever particular reason, the Democratic Party has been trying to convince us that it's not that big of a deal. That Joe Biden is working tirelessly. That Kamala Harris is working tirelessly in order to deal with this issue. Stop giving them the weapons. If you stop giving them the weapons, it stops. 70% of all of the killing, all of the death, all of the murder, the rapes, the using those people as human shields, all of that, 70% of that, if not more, is paid by us. Our tax dollars go to doing that. That atrocity, one atrocity after the next, that Matthew Miller and those other psychopaths in the Biden administration backed and supported. So yeah, the state that has a large Muslim population, of course, I want them to be able to say, you didn't stand by us, we're not going to stand by you. Get elected on your own steam. Figure it out. And considering it seems like they're also going to lose Michigan, apparently they did not figure it out. They did not figure it out. You can support a genocide, or you can win a race. You can't, nor should you, be able to do both. The pro-genocide candidate lost. Now, this question about what Trump is going to do, as I said, Trump is a wild card. But it's not about what Trump is going to do. The issue is what Joe Biden was doing. That is not a hypothetical. That is a flat fact. He decided to give Netanyahu a blank check. Kamala Harris, who sat there beside him, said, well, I was in the room with these decisions. I helped him. I was instrumental in these decisions. Okay, then you're stuck with those two then. You can't disambiguate yourself from the administration after saying you were in the room and you helped with all of these decisions, nor would you have done anything differently. Fair enough. Fair enough. The American public heard that. And because they heard that, and because the overwhelming majority wanted a change, you lost. If I had to pin it on anything, I would pin it on that. When you get a situation like this, for example, clip 3, America wants something different. Listen to what he said. And I'm going to play the clip for Harris also, but listen to what this pollster or this analyst is saying when he's going into what the American public effectively wants.
Said, let's look at the numbers on the mood of the country. It's a pretty dour mood in terms of the way people feel things are going in the United States. Nationally, only 7% of voters say they're enthusiastic. 19% say they're satisfied. Look at these numbers. 43% dissatisfied, 29% angry, 72% of the electorate nationally say they're dissatisfied or angry.
Think about that. 72% of the electorate say they're either dissatisfied or angry. Think about that. Put that in context. Meaning this is not just, I believe the country is going in the wrong direction. This is, we are angry, we are upset, we don't like this, something is fundamentally wrong. That's what that is. And then you get Harris, who, when given the opportunity, comes back and says the following.
To ensure not another Palestinian dies due to bombs being funded by U.S. tax dollars.
So, said, let's look at the numbers. Or Puerto Rico.
Where's
The
it?
question is, as president,
Said, let's look at the numbers. Said, let's look at the numbers.
I mean,
This.
we were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure, well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden,
I know.
and so that would be one change in terms of, but also, I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So let me get this straight. The majority of the population believes the country is going in the wrong direction. That it's either going in the wrong direction or they're angry. Harris, when asked the question, how are you different? What would you have done differently? She doesn't have an answer. Okay, what would you do differently? She doesn't have an answer. But the person who claims she is a new way forward cannot in any way articulate what that new way forward is, or even what she would have done differently than the last guy was there. And understand, the last guy was there, their perspective was, we're effing angry. How does that work as a political campaign? Meaning, how do you expect to win a race like that under those terms? Now, this does give a lot of Hillary Clinton energy to it, with this idea that I'm just going to bring up Trump, I'm just going to bring up Trump. Trump is the most important thing that we should be talking about, etc., etc., etc. Okay, well, that didn't work. And again, running around the country with Liz Cheney is not going to be the most invigorating thing in the world for your base, or even for Democrats in general. And the fact that Liz Cheney was not even popular within the Republican Party, I'm not even sure how much bang for the buck it gave you. So you were willing to shave off your left to try to get a mythical right. And that right wasn't there for you. Just amazing. Just amazing. Will this provoke soul searching? I don't have an answer for that. I will show you, though, part of the issue. So if you go into the Gaza issue, for example, and over again, Kamala Harris was asked, what are you going to do differently? What are you going to do? The Gaza thing is horrible. How are you going to stop this issue? And she effectively deployed the exact same rhetoric that Joe Biden was deploying. Oh, the Palestinian issue is horrible. However, October 7th is the most important thing in the world. And over again, that kept coming up. And so when she's finally asked the question directly, okay, well, what do you say to all of these people in places like Michigan and whatnot that believe this issue is dramatically important, that you are funding, backing a genocide, and that they are going to vote for a third party, or for that matter, vote for Trump because of that? What do you say to those people? Her response, let's see, I believe this is 6. This.
You were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
I believe it's 6.
What do you say to voters who are thinking about supporting a third-party candidate or staying on the couch, not voting at all because of this issue?
Listen, I am not going to deny the strong feelings that people have. I don't know that anyone who has seen the images who would not have strong feelings about what has happened, much less those who have relatives who have died and been killed. And I know people and I've talked with people. So I appreciate that. But I also do know that for many people who care about this issue, they also care about bringing down the price of groceries. They also care about our democracy and not having a president of the United States who admires dictators and is a fascist. They also care about the fact that we need practical, common sense solutions from a leader who is willing to work across the aisle on behalf of the American people and not themselves. They want a president who cares about a fundamental freedom to make decisions about your own body, understanding that we're not trying to change anyone's belief, but let's not have the government telling women what to do with their body.
But again, that sounds nice, but we're talking about a genocide. Meaning, we're talking about a large number of people being indiscriminately slaughtered, and not just slaughtered, with the express intent to ethnic cleanse the area. The Biden administration is fully aware of this. And on top of the Biden administration being fully aware of this, Blinken, Hashteen, and some of the other people that he's been sending over there know exactly what is taking place on the ground. Blinken goes before Congress and lies about the fact that Netanyahu is starving the Palestinians. The entire point is to ethnically cleanse northern Gaza and ethnically cleanse southern Lebanon. That is their objective. That is what they've been trying to do. That is what they have been doing. Now, from the standpoint of the war, no, they're not winning the war. You can kill a lot of people. That doesn't necessarily mean you're accomplishing your military objectives. Now, it just so happened that one of their military objectives is to kill, exterminate, or expel the people from northern Gaza or from southern Lebanon. In southern Lebanon, they've run into a buzzsaw. Again, you have the capability to kill a lot of people. That doesn't necessarily get you to your military objectives, which was to destroy Hamas. Hamas still exists. Or whether that was to stop the missiles from firing or coming into Israel, those rockets and missiles are still coming into Israel. And now Iran has entered the picture because Iran is going to respond to Israel's provocation. Instead of telling him to stop, meaning you are expanding this war, you are provoking a larger war that may drag the United States into this war. Instead of telling him to stop, because we didn't necessarily want to be in that situation, Joe Biden gave a blank check. If you're Palestinian, if you're Muslim, if you're Arab, if you care about genocide in general, you can see the pictures, you can see all of these people getting slaughtered and killed, and then Kamala Harris is going to come to you and say, hey, I know that my policy is doing this, but I still would like your vote. Now, what does it mean if a political party can spend a year lying about supporting financially and politically a genocide and then get elected again on that ticket? What does it mean for the future? And does it mean that it becomes clear that a political party can back a genocide and still win a race? And are you okay with that? Does that sit okay with you? It doesn't sit okay with me. It's not that I have a dog in the hunt that I would prefer one person or the other to win. It's more so that I don't want it instantiated into our political space that you can do what Joe Biden has done for the last year and then win. There's also this weirdness with Democrats and negotiations. It's as if they don't believe that the U.S. should negotiate with anybody, that either we dictate or we just stay at war. And I think that's outrageous. So when Donald Trump goes to talk to Kim Jong-un, she interprets that as, well, he's going to talk to the dictators. When Donald Trump is trying to make a deal with Russia, oh, he's giving Ukraine away. The reality of it is, the Ukraine war was a senseless project to surround Russia and to militarily and economically damage it. It was a pointless endeavor. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives for no reason at all, at the very least no good reason. Regardless of what you've been told, there were the first Minsk and Minsk II agreements, meaning these were agreements that the U.S., Europe got involved in that was going to end the conflict in Ukraine. Instead of it being an end to the conflict in Ukraine, Angela Merkel, Hollande come out and say, we lied to the Russians and we did a deal for peace that would give Ukraine enough time to build a massive military. That's outrageous, right? And so the way they talk about it is, well, this was unprovoked. Russia just went in for no reason. Russia is trying to take all of Europe. This is the way they've articulated. This is the way they've talked about it. They've lied all the way through. The point that I'm trying to get at is the position of saying we need to stop all of these people from dying is not the Democratic position. From the Democrats' point of view, despite the fact that Ukraine is losing, we want to continue to put money into that losing cause. That is outrageous. And again, when they knocked over the Ukrainian government and all of these other issues started to take place, William Burns told them back in 2008 that if they keep pushing in Ukraine, the NATO membership, that it's going to provoke a civil war. That civil war is on the Russian border. Russia will have to get involved. It is something they don't want to do, but they would do it anyway. Burns full well understood it. And yet, when he ran in the campaign, when all of these people ran in the campaign, they just outright lied to the American public. Same thing with Israel. Acting as if all this stuff started on October 7th. Acting like the Russians blew up their own pipeline. Putting out dodgy intelligence on various issues, and then using it and making this argument that this is savvy use of dodgy intelligence in order to affect the media and push it one way or the other. not to mention inflation. Because the dirty secret is that the war in Ukraine was also a driver of inflation. If you think of the amount of energy that we were getting from Russia, I think it was like 700,000 barrels a day. We could live without it because America is an energy producer. Europe can't. So whereas Europe was getting a certain amount of energy from Russia at a certain cost, their energy costs spiked to 5 times higher than it would have been under normal circumstances. When the pipeline was blown up by Joe Biden, that made the situation that much worse for Germany. Because if you think about it, not only is Germany not getting the energy, it is also given money to the state, meaning Ukraine, that they're accusing of blowing up the pipeline in the first place. So not only is their energy situation worse because their companies are being deindustrialized because they can't afford the energy costs, but they're also giving money to the entity that they are blaming for blowing it up in the first place. Now, Ukraine did blow up that pipeline. The U.S. blew up that pipeline. I'm just making the point that they are a double whammy in regards to A, incompetence, but B, also just being fundamentally taken advantage of. This is all of Europe. So when Joe Biden comes out and says we have the strongest economy, yes, because we gutted Europe. And we gutted them for straightforward reasons. A, if a war takes place, we would prefer that war to take place on the European continent. So from our point of view, it is far easier for us to fight in Europe. Even if Europe gets destroyed, at the very least, we stay untouched. So there's that part. The other part is also we want to remove, let's say, the connection between Europe and Russia. And one of the physical manifestations of that connection was Nord Stream pipeline. The U.S. complained about that pipeline for decades, or for years, I should say. And when finally the opportunity came about, they blew it up. A major act of terrorism. My point is, we have been lied to for the last several years on this issue. And when you finally get a president who, at the very least, brings up the potential for conversation, the potential for peace, he's derided as being okay with dictators and abandoning our allies. Again, the war in Ukraine never needed to take place. This was a war that we provoked. When you overthrow a government on the Russian border, yeah, there will be consequences to that, every bit as much as we will take issue if the Mexican government was overthrown and Russia put in a patsy nation on the border. Just outrageous. I want to go into some of the things that were taking place last night. So, let's go into some clips. This is, I showed the America wants something different. Jonathan Capehart is confused. He doesn't quite get it. He doesn't understand what took place. Now, as I always point out, liberals are in a bubble. And because they're in that bubble, everything is fundamentally confusing to them. But Trump is a fascist. Trump is a racist. Donald Trump is going to be the end of all things. He tried to shoot Liz Cheney. He's going to be a dictator. That's their mindset. And so when you get that guy to win, they are despondent and they are fundamentally confused. I want to go to Capehart. Listen to some of the stuff that they were saying last night as they had to reconcile the fact that Kamala Harris lost.
What do you say to voters who are thinking about supporting a third-party candidate or staying on the couch?
We're asked on two different shows.
Question is, as president,
Said, let's look at the numbers up.
There's a shift right, and then there's a shift to Trump, and shifting to Trumpism. And, I'm looking at a lot of things, especially after David talked about looking at counties and, how Trump is gaining on what he did in 2020. And to me, I'm mystified in some ways. Simply because we're talking about a twice impeached, 4 times indicted, convicted on 34 felony counts, former president. That's one bucket. Then in another bucket, you have all of the things.
Right. I'm going to go back to him for a moment. Right. Stop there, Jonathan. Stop there. Why? Isn't that the question? Why? Because you're right. We brought that up here. Twice convicted, twice impeached, got accused of being a sexual abuser, nearly shot twice. They called him everything but a child of God, and yet he beat the stuffing out of your candidate. Don't you need to start there with why? And if you exclude for the moment this idea that everybody is sexist, racist, bigoted, or misinformed, then maybe you could start scratching at the wall of, I wonder, is there something wrong with us? Did we drop the ball somewhere? Did we miss something? How does a blue-collar billionaire, a billionaire, take the position of hero of the working class? How does that happen? Don't you need to figure that out? Isn't that really the operative question? It's easy to absolve yourself of all blame, guilt, and, fault by basically arguing that, well, people are just racist, sexist, and bigoted, or misinformed. It's another thing to actually try to get to the nub of it. The political party's job is to get votes. You can use that excuse that it's their fault that you couldn't get your votes. But at the end of the day, it boils down to you and your campaign and why the Democratic Party couldn't mount an argument against somebody who has all of these deficits. What does it say about you? That is my point.
There's a shift right, and then there's a shift to Trump, and shifting to Trumpism. And, I'm looking at a lot of things, especially after David talked about looking at counties and, how Trump is gaining on what he did in 2020. And to me, I'm mystified in some ways, simply because we're talking about a twice impeached, 4 times indicted, convicted on 34 felony counts former president. That's one bucket. Then in another bucket, you have all of the things he's been saying on the campaign trail that gets to the decency that the woman was talking about in that last report, and how she wanted to vote for Vice President Harris because she didn't like that Madison Square Garden rally. I am mystified that despite all of that, he's gaining support compared to 2020. And it gets back to something I said earlier at some point, one of the hours ago, that who are we as a country? And we're starting to find out. And from what I'm seeing right now, I'm not sure I like it.
He's not sure he likes it. Because from his point of view, the country is turning into a fascist state. He said at one point, maybe America just doesn't want democracy. Where's that clip? I know I have that clip somewhere too. He points out, there's some different K-part confused. Maybe it's number 9. Because at one point he points out, maybe America is just not into democracy anymore.
Sense of humility, simply because polls don't vote, people vote, and so in elections we finally get to hear what the American people have to say. And I've come to this election with an open mind, and I want to know what the American people have to say. What was it? 6 hours ago, I was mystified by what was going on, and now I can't help but think that if this election seems to be, if it proves out that the millions of people who are watching Fox News, if that ends up being the case, then I can't help but wonder if the American people have given up on democracy.
That is astonishing. Maybe because my candidate didn't win, the American public gave up on democracy. As he watches an election with America choosing a different candidate. Also, this idea of democracy. How many votes did Kamala Harris get during the primary? How many votes? Tell me, K-Part. Give me a ballpark figure. How many did she win in the primary? I would tell you this, uncommitted won more votes than Kamala Harris in the primary. The last primary that Kamala Harris was in, she couldn't even make it to the first state. She was that bad of a candidate. If you remember, part of the reason that Joe Biden didn't get out the race was because he believed Kamala Harris was a horrible candidate. And because she was a horrible candidate, he thought he would have to carry the burden in order to win, in order to wedge her in that office. I've said years ago that Kamala Harris would never be president of the United States. I said it years ago. I said she's awkward, she's transitional or transactional, and she doesn't necessarily believe anything. And lo and behold, she goes into a race, and the moment she opens her mouth, her numbers drop. Now, Capehart is mystified. I would imagine there are plenty of Democrats that are mystified. They don't quite get it. They don't quite understand. And as I keep pointing out, the fact that they don't understand is part of the problem. This bubble that they're existing in, they're out of their goddamn minds. The idea that one Democrat after the next will come to you, look you in the face and say, the genocide is not that bad. Kamala Harris needs to be elected. And when you point out, no, the genocide is that bad, and what is wrong with your moral core and your ethics, when you're willing to give a pass to all of these people being slaughtered in order to get your candidate elected, missing the fact that maybe if you took a different tact and was willing or not willing to give a pass, if you had some level of standards, that your party would be different. Meaning, this blue no matter who stuff, you gotta vote for the Democrat regardless of what happens, because they're at least worse. One genocide less, or one concentration camp less. This mindset is a race to the bottom. Year after year after year, they get progressively worse because any notion of standards is not part of the political process. You would think that of anything, genocide would be a line that you wouldn't want to go past. Meaning, I'm willing to support all of this with the exception of this. This is too far. I can't back this. And the reason why you don't back it is because it needs to be made perfectly clear that you can't win doing this. Meaning, do I really want a political campaign to be able to spend billions of dollars to kill women and children to the tens of thousands to ethnically cleanse an area to full well know that's what they're doing? Knowing and having the administration to lie about it, actively lie about it. And then I'm rewarding them with a vote. Do I really want that? Now, Capehart is confused because it doesn't matter to Capehart. It doesn't matter to Keith Ellison. It doesn't matter to many of these other Democrats that all of these people being slaughtered. For them, Donald Trump is an ogre. Donald Trump is a threat. We must stop Donald Trump regardless of what else happens. We got to stop Donald Trump. Missing what all of these other people are pointing out, that you are backing a genocide. What is wrong with you people? Michigan makes its point clear. Pennsylvania makes its point clear. Capehart and many of the Democrats, despite the fact that I pointed out that Pennsylvania will most likely go to Trump, they seem to be utterly and entirely confused about the whole thing. And my question is, will this provoke a crisis? Will this provoke an autopsy? Will they come to some assessment of, we're getting something wrong, and we need to figure out what that something is? What is the Democratic Party now that Kamala Harris has failed? What about that question? Meaning, who are they now that Kamala Harris has basically flamed out? And that a second term of Joe Biden, which is what Kamala Harris would have basically represented, is no more. What does it mean? And understand, they attacked Trump on the war because Trump wanted to end the war. They attacked him for North Korea. They attacked him for all of those things. And at the end of the day, the American public chose, we want less war. They are confused by that. Now, when Whoopi Goldberg tells Liz Cheney that she has this great moral fiber and everything else, understand this issue with liberals. They are okay with killing. They're okay with death. They're okay with their monsters going into other countries and killing people for humanitarian reasons, dropping humanitarian bombs. They have zero issue with that. So they would be okay with rehabilitating George Bush, who got 1 million Iraqis killed, that spent $10 trillion invading a country on the premise of a lie, that instituted a torture regime, that got rid of habeas corpus. They are trying to get George Bush to step into the race because George Bush is a statesman. Same thing with Dick Cheney. The idea that you're going to have Liz and Dick Cheney as being your standard bearers for democracy is deranged. It's utterly deranged. But this is what they were trying to sell. This is the argument they were making. Donald Trump is an ogre. Donald Trump is a fascist. Donald Trump is Hitler. So you can't necessarily vote in Donald Trump, even at the expense of a genocide. You can't vote Donald Trump in. He's a wild card. And the American public seems, A, be sick of these wars. B, had no issue coming up with a new model. And look, that doesn't necessarily mean Trump is going to do anything radically different. I'm just making the point that that was the argument that Trump made. Meaning he got elected on this argument that we need to stop having all of these wars. Whether he does it or not is secondary to the point. I'm making the point that that was his argument. That argument won. That argument won. Donald Trump was going to Muslim communities saying, I'm going to end the war. Again, that argument won. Democrats, be it Bill Clinton, be it Obama, or for that matter, Keith Ellison, they came to the American public and effectively said, well, man, you got to understand where Israel is coming from, which was not a satisfying argument. Or, well, what about abortions? What about, wages? We have to deal with those things. We can't deal with the genocide. Again, that is somewhat of an uncomfortable argument to make, considering we can see exactly what is taking place on our television screens every day. And then when you get into states like Pennsylvania, shouldn't there be some soul searching with Pennsylvania? I mean, Pennsylvania was a Democratic stronghold for like 50 years. And then all of a sudden, it became a swing state. Why? Isn't that curious? You don't care about that? Here's the other thing. About 50% of the public don't vote. So you get 320 million people in this country. 50% vote, the other 50% don't. Why? You have about 120 million Americans that you can get votes for. And yet, you don't. You don't even try. You don't even make the pitch. And there's no honest appraisal as to why. That's not weird. That's not strange. You've effectively lost a race to a man that you call a sexual abuser and a fascist, Hitler. And yet, that guy's beating you. That's not curious or concerning to you? I'm putting it in these terms because I'm trying to get across that every Democrat that I've ever talked to about this issue, I would say, why does the American public see you in ways that you don't see yourself? And the only thing they come up with is misinformation. Meaning they absolve themselves of blame. Even when Hillary Clinton lost, if you remember, Hillary Clinton absolved herself of all blame. It was the Russians. It was Comey. It was any and everything else. Blacks were insufficiently loyal. The environmental community got it wrong, etc., etc., etc. Everything except Hillary Clinton was a horrible candidate who ran a horrible race. And I'm saying the same thing is true for Harris, with one addition, that part of the problem is the party. It's the party. You spent a year telling people to back a genocide. And then when she finally comes out with a campaign, nobody knows what she wants. Nobody knows what her ultimate objective is. And ultimately, you had to put her in office to see what she was going to do, because despite being a new way forward, she couldn't articulate what that even meant. Do I expect an autopsy to take place? No, I don't. I want to go to another clip. So this one is a Meltdown by a Kamala Harris supporter who also came across this notion, oh my God, she's going to lose. And he literally freaks out.
Jesus Christ, I'm so pissed off! God damn it!
That is great. That is great. Let's watch that again. I'm sorry. I gotta see that again. got a nice set of tits there, buddy. Got a nice set of tits. That is fascinating. That is utterly fascinating. Let's look at the comments. Until you're sentenced, you're not a felon. Look it up. Carlos Rodriguez, fair enough. Fair enough, sir. Fair enough. And by the way, my point of view is those charges were ridiculous. I mean, this is, again, another issue, right? Democrats went around saying Donald Trump is going to lock up his political opponents. He's going to lock up his political opponents. As they use lawfare to go after Trump. Understand the charges in New York are absurd. And honestly, they're probably going to get rid of them. They're trying to argue that Donald Trump paying money to hush up a porn star is a campaign expense. And because it's a campaign expense, that it is something that he didn't declare. And so on his bill, like on the thing, he says legal fee. So they're trying to say that A, it's a crime. And because it's in pursuant of another crime, now you can make it a felony. Now, forget the fact for the moment that Hillary Clinton, when she bought that dossier, called it a legal fee when it was campaign opposition research. New York didn't charge her with a felony, nor did they take her to trial. You just had the FEC fine her for it. Now, the FEC didn't even fine Trump for it because they didn't see it as a crime. And when they tried to bring the FEC in to have that explanation to the courtroom, the judge wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't even delineate what was the initial crime. They said, well, it could be a tax issue, or you could say that it was an election issue. Either one of those things are fine. It was outrageous. If you are not going to charge Hillary Clinton for it, how are you charging Trump? Because you're effectively saying they did the exact same thing and both were living in New York. Darren Levy, do you think the aliens will visit President Trump's White House? Will he be the disclosure president? So when he was on Joe Rogan, Donald Trump talks about it obliquely. Just saying, hey, I've talked to pilots. There are things out there that we don't necessarily know what they are. But he has not shown a huge interest or propensity for this issue. One of the other interesting things is whether or not he's going to open the JFK files. Now, beforehand, Trump said he was going to open those files. Is he going to actually do it? I don't know. The bourgeois did a similar choice in 1930, fascism rather than communism. For these primaries, it has been Trump rather than Sanders. Yes. They have a saying that the rise of the right is a failure of the left. That if there's a left-wing alternative in order to alleviate the issues of the public, that the public would choose that left-wing alternative. In our situation, you must understand the only reason that either Trump or, for that matter, social media will gain the prominence that it has is because the center failed. If you had a political system that was attending to the needs of the public, and that was the center of your political system, then the outrageous candidates on the side can never win because the people in the center are already attending to the needs of the public. When you get a situation where the center no longer is attending to those needs and you get the 70% of people who are either angry or believe the country is going in the wrong direction, then by definition, almost in a magical sense, those people will find somebody else. They would look for different sources of information if they think they've been lied to, or if it's been shown that they've been lied to and the sources that they claim are credible have lost their credibility. And in a political sense, if they don't believe or they get the sense that the political space is not attending to their needs, it's not dealing with their real world concerns, they will start looking out the box for other candidates who, let's say the center, doesn't deem to be worthy of the position. So when orthodoxy says we need to stay in these forever wars, and the public is like, why are we staying in these forever wars? Okay, well, the orthodoxy is not going to understand why the public all of a sudden is sick of fighting in one war after the next and wasting all of the money to do it. The public looks for something else. Same thing with inflation. Same thing with, I guess you could say, the issue of immigration. All of these things are issues where the public did not believe the center is attending to their needs. Hence, they start looking for other things. Now, the same thing is true for information. If they're saying This unprovoked war in Ukraine. Okay, well, that's a lie. Russia blew up its own pipeline. Okay, well, that's also a lie. They acted like they started on October 7th. That's also a lie. Pretending that Hamas didn't want the deal. That's also a lie. Saying that Netanyahu or that the Israeli government had a deal. That was also a lie. Acting as if killing Sinwar is pathway to some sort of resolution. All of them know that Netanyahu is not seeking a resolution and is seeking to create greater Israel. They know it. They understand it. They clearly can see what is happening, and they're covering and they're lying on it. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And more to the point of that one ended up getting 1 million people killed and getting us bogged down into the Middle East for decades. Not to mention, we end up losing that place anyway because Afghanistan kicked us out and Iraq is trying to kick us out. I'm trying to point out to you that all of these things are failures. And these are failures on a massive fucking level. And the American public sees these failures. They get the sense that the political space in no sense cares about them and their concerns. Hence, you get Trump, where they want to punish the political space because they believe that they're not in their interest and they see that Donald Trump is hated among these people that they don't necessarily like. Or B, they accept this premise that he is working in their interest because he is untethered to anybody. Whatever and however they place this in their head, there would be some people who want to punish him because of the genocide. There may be some people who want to punish him purely from the standpoint of, I'm sick of the way the system is and the system needs to change. Whatever the rationale and the reasons that people basically had, the center failed. It failed. Janice Anderson, entitled people will never soul search. It is easier for them to externalize because to admit really will require them to change. And change is hard. Janice, agreed. Agreed. It's far easier to say it's the Russians, it's the Chinese, it's the fascists, that America is just a fascist country. It's easier to say all of that as opposed to deal with the fact maybe there's something wrong with us. That's hard. I would argue that's necessary. In fact, I would go further. I thought Kamala Harris would have been better off coming out and being honest, to level with the American public. I thought that was the only way to go with it. To say, look, we have had failures. There's some things that we haven't necessarily done right. I have not necessarily agreed with each and everything that Joe Biden has done in this office, and I will chart a new way forward. And you explain that. You can have your contract with America, whatever you want to do, but you need to be able to articulate why they should put you in that office, why you want to be in that office. If you want to bring up Trump, fair enough, but over and over again when they pointed out, hey, those attacks on Trump aren't working, people need to know who you are. And what did Kamala Harris say? Well, people can do two things at once. They can walk and chew gum. So I can articulate me and who I am while simultaneously attacking Trump. Clearly, that didn't work either. That didn't work either. Where's my big man at? I want to... Where's my big man at?
I can't believe Trump's actually gonna win this fucking thing. Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm so pissed off. God damn it.
Oh, that is great. That is great. I'm so pissed off. He's gonna win the fucking thing. That is great. That is fantastic. I don't know who this guy is. Who is this guy? Do you guys know who he is? I don't know who he is.
God damn it.
God damn it! God damn it! He did not take that well. He did not take that well. He's not the only one that didn't take that well. So pontificating on air. I believe this was CNN. And listen to what they say now as part of the mistakes that took place, because now they're having this kind of autopsy on air. Kamala Harris, by the way, did not give a campaign speech, a closing speech. What is with women who want to be treated equal, who run in these races, but don't give a concession speech when they lose? Now, I got to be honest, when Hillary Clinton lost that race, I thought it was funny in one sense, but I gave her a pass on the concession speech because I realized it had to be a demoralizing and debilitating thing to lose a race when you were 90% chance of winning the race. I have no such feelings for Kamala on this. You called him everything but a child of God. You attacked the man. You vigorously went after him. Okay, fair enough. Part of the responsibility of a campaign to lose is to give a concession speech and to give it the same night. And the idea that they're pushing this concession speech off is a very weird premise. And the only people who have ever done that in modern memory are Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. You should also be held to the same standards as any man that is running the race, meaning you should have stood your ass up there and accepted the fact that you lost and tell your public, we lost, we did our best, Trump is your president, thank you very much, I'm leaving. That's what should have happened. That is not what happened. CNN is pontificating on what went wrong. I believe this is CNN. And they have come to the assessment, hey, maybe if Joe Biden got out the race earlier, she would have had a much better chance of winning.
I can't believe Trump's actually gonna win this fucking thing.
Come to elections with it.
There's no sound on that. What the hell? There we are.
Well, and that's what makes the timing, I think, of President Biden's decision to step down after the debate something that, if she does in fact lose, will be under a microscope, because of course there was so much discussion even over the summer about potentially having an open primary and having that fight play out within the Democratic Party. So I think it's one of the big questions moving forward.
Well, they didn't want to have an open primary. They didn't want to have an open primary. I wanted to have an open primary. Lefties wanted to have an open primary. If you remember, lefties, our thing was, well, obviously you should have an open primary. You should figure out who's going to be the best. We're getting better at lip reading. You can hear that? Wait a minute. Hold on.
Biden's decision to step down after the debate, something that, if she does in fact lose, will be under a microscope, because of course there was so much discussion even over the summer about potentially having an open primary and having that fight play out within the Democratic Party. So I think it's one of the big questions moving forward.
Yes, they should have obviously had a primary. Now, this was something that I pointed out as a weakness in the Democratic Party this time around. Think about it for a moment. The Republican Party has a primary. You get Nikki Haley, DeSantis, Donald Trump doesn't really get involved, but you get debate after debate after debate after debate with them putting out Republican ideas, putting on talking points, explaining what they want to do, going after Democrats, and you get that for weeks. You don't get that on the Democratic side. You don't get that articulation of what they want to do. You don't get the situation where they're hardening a candidate against various attacks. Because even during the primary process, when you attack a candidate in the primary, you are inoculating that candidate for stuff that takes place later. Think of Donald Trump for a moment. They call Donald Trump fascist, Hitler, racist. They say all of this stuff. But truth of the matter is, Donald Trump had been in the public eye for like 10 years. And any and everything that you could say about Trump had already been said about Trump. It was baked into the cake. So he was on some level inoculated from any of this other stuff of fascists, racists, and everything else, because his personality and identity was already formed. The only people that would work with were people who already believed that Trump was those things. Which is the reason why Axios, when they did their reporting, they pointed out to Kamala Harris, this isn't working. You need to articulate what you want to do and more about yourself. The fascists, racists, that stuff isn't working. Nor should it. Nor should it. Having a primary process would have forced either Harris or whoever the Democratic candidate was to prove themselves in the fires of an election. And in proving themselves in the fires of an election, hey, maybe Kamala Harris wins, maybe she doesn't win, but I would tell you from standpoint of policy, from standpoint of attacks that could be leveled at her, that stuff would have been hashed out in the primary. And you would have been able to give the American public this kind of big show of Democratic priorities. Basically, this is what we believe in. Because it's not like they're going to be saying things that are drastically different from one another. It's going to be shades. And it's going to be whatever the Democratic Party at that point represents. Well, you didn't get that. What you got was a president that was barely there, a vice president that lied to protect that president, and a VP that was completely stuck to whatever the prior president was doing, whether it was on Gaza, whether it was on Israel, whether it was on Ukraine and foreign policy. She couldn't unwed herself from that. And again, not being able to unwed yourself in a political climate, with this being one of the main points.
Well, and that's what makes the timing, I think, of President
said, let's look at the numbers on the mood of the country. It's a pretty dour mood in terms of the way people feel things are going in the United States. Nationally, only 7% of voters say they're enthusiastic. 19% say they're satisfied. Look at these numbers. 43% dissatisfied, 29% angry, 72% of the electorate nationally say they're dissatisfied or angry. What about America's best days, we ask? Are they in the future or are they in the past? 61% of voters in this election across the country say America's best days are ahead of the country. 6 in 10 say so. 34% say the best days are in the past. And finally, President Joe Biden's approval rating, it's at 41% in these early preliminary exit poll findings. 58% of voters in this election across the country nationally disapprove of the way that the incumbent Democratic president is doing his job, Jay.
All right, interesting stuff, David Chalian. Thanks so much. And let's talk about it with our Puerto Rico, where I'm.
Question is, as president,
Said, let's look at the numbers on.
Were asked on two different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I know.
And so that would be one change in terms of, but also I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So, in a situation where you get upwards of 70% of the public that is either angry or wants something different, you get 58% of the public that believes Joe Biden did a shitty job as president, and they disapprove of his job, as they should. I keep saying Joe Biden is the worst president we've ever had. Harris, when asked about it multiple times, what would you have done differently, or what will you do differently, did not have an answer for either of those questions. I'm trying to nail down how damaging that is. The public, we want something different. Full stop. We don't like the way this is going on. And Harris is effectively saying, I will be the same as Joe Biden. And says it over and over and over again. That is damaging to a campaign. Especially if the thesis of your argument is, I am going to be different. I'm a new way forward. When really, it was change on the outside with continuity on the inside. And when people recognize, oh my God, she's the same old, it didn't work. It contradicts your argument. You can't contradict the theme of your campaign. And if the theme of your campaign is, I am something fundamentally different and we're going to have new change in this country, but you can't articulate what that change is, you have just tripped up your own campaign. You've just tripped up your own campaign. There are other clips dealing with the Young Turks. In fact, let's go to this one now. This is, I haven't really even seen this clip, but during the election year, the Young Turks are great to watch, especially when a Democrat loses. It's usually funny. So I'm going to go to, let's see if I can play this right. This, and this.
I'm getting revved up here on a. Having said that, what percentage is reporting in North Carolina? 76% reporting you're down by 7. You're in a world of trouble. You're like, yes, it matters which counties, but you're still in a world of trouble. And so much trouble that one of the organizations has already called it. Okay, now let's go to Georgia.
Yeah, by the way, Iowa has been called by CNN at least for Trump.
Iowa called for Trump, so there goes that nonsense. I'm going to, I'm getting revved up here on a significant rant. So, because Kamala Harris is not winning, and the people who thought that Kamala Harris was going to win in a landslide are totally wrong. Having said that, what percentage is reporting in North Carolina?
76.
Who are these people that thought she was going to win in a landslide? Who are these people? Did they even look at the map? Like, I mean, for fuck's sake, you can look at the map. It doesn't, like, I am super curious about what states they thought she was going to win. When I pull up this map, and I say, okay, well, Trump is going to get Nevada and Arizona. The polling was very clear. He's most likely going to get North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. The polling was very clear. It was consistent all the way through. The only question, honestly, was Pennsylvania and Michigan. Where were they going to go? And Wisconsin on some level. That was the only question. So I don't know who these people are who thought Harris is going to totally run away with it. I did this just before the election because I wanted to put my vote down, my prognostication down before it ever took place. I could not see how she was going to run away with it. I don't even know the pathway that she would run away with it with. I mean, did they think she was going to get Nevada and Arizona? Okay, even if you give her Nevada and Arizona, she still has to get Pennsylvania or Michigan on one of these. Fact of the matter is, she lost both. She lost both. I don't know who these people are. I also want to point something else out that I noted. I said yesterday Virginia is a bellwether. Now, back during the Hillary Clinton race, when Clinton was going against Trump, I remember sitting up watching, and Virginia was taking forever to get called for Clinton. And what I realized was Virginia was this kind of bellwether state that was give some kind of context of what is going to happen in some of the other states later on in the night. If a Democrat is having a hard time getting Virginia, that means that they're going to have a hard time getting some of the other states because there's a momentum in a particular direction that Virginia is feeling because Virginia is somewhat purple. The fact that it took forever for Virginia to be called, I thought, oh, she's screwed. She's screwed. This has a Hillary energy to it. It shouldn't take that long for Virginia to be called. And if it's a situation where she was going to win handedly, Virginia would have been called like that. It took hours. It took hours. I honestly don't know what these people have been watching when they are making prognostications and assessments about the Democratic Party running away with it. I don't get it. Honest to God, don't get it. Like I said, the fact that Virginia took so long to flip over gave some kind of context to what else was going on in the rest of the country and the rest of the nations. I don't know why they thought Michigan was a toss-up. Fair enough. But Pennsylvania had been consistently red for weeks at this point. And Fetterman even came out and said something to the effect of there's a lot of energy in Pennsylvania for Donald Trump. Axelrod came out and said there is no momentum on the ground for Harris, meaning there's no enthusiasm in it for Harris. And if you're running around with Liz Cheney calling her a statesman, I can imagine that would be somewhat of a buzzkill. When you shaved off the left, where you basically said, I don't need the left, I'm going to get all of these Republicans. Okay, well, again, how did that work for you? The idea that you're going to ignore your base in order to try to get Cheney Republicans, and that's going to be your winning coalition. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. That clearly didn't work. So, let's write this down. Ignoring genocide, not a pathway to victory. Cutting off your base, not a pathway to victory. Not having a clear, concise theory of the case, a theme for your campaign. Again, not a winning strategy. All of these things are failures. Not having a primary, not a winning strategy. Dummying up or changing around the primary process to make it easier for your candidate to get through. Again, that is not necessarily the best thing that's indicative of success. Spending your entire campaign screaming and screeching about your opposition as opposed to articulating a vision of the country for yourself. Not a winning strategy. None of these things are winning strategies. The problem that Democrats are going to have is that they are completely incapable of having an honest assessment of what happened. They don't do autopsies well. Part of it is because they're so elitist and have so much hubris that from their point of view, well, clearly the people didn't vote for us because they were misinformed. Clearly, those people are not as intelligent. They're not as bright. There's something wrong with them, which is the reason why they didn't vote in the obviously best candidate, Kamala Harris. That's the way they think. I've talked to these people. That is literally the way they think. When Joe Biden comes out and says his supporters are garbage, they believe that. Meaning when Joe Biden comes out and says,
state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is their supporters. His demonization seems unconscionable. And it's
now, again, that's one of those things where I love the irony. The only people out there, or the only trash out there, his supporters. The demonization is horrible and needs to stop. So as you call over 100 million people garbage, trash, for all intents and purposes, that is even worse than deplorables. You decry the fact that they are demonizing other people. Great. Just great. What a failure. What a failure. And I mean a failure on a massive fucking level. Let's go to Joy Ann Reid, because clearly the issue is that white women did not vote for Kamala Harris in sufficient numbers. That is clearly the problem, according to Joy Ann Reid and her theory of the case. Let's see this, and this.
See the numbers that Joe Biden had. You know, it's a state that I think Democrats definitely were reaching for. There was a lot of work to try to turn out the college campuses, which were really thick and really packed, and try to turn out the suburbs. And I think there was a lot of hope because of just the insanity, can we say fairly, of the person who's running for.
What do you mean? What do you mean you're trying to turn out the college campuses? What do you mean you're trying to turn out the college campuses? You mean the same college campuses they were agitating because this administration was putting so much money into a genocide? You were trying to turn those people out and get those people oriented to vote for you when you wouldn't stand up for the issues that they cared about, which should have been an issue that all of you cared about. The college campuses was the focal point to the protests about what was taking place in regards to Gaza in the Middle East. Joy Ann Reid and many of these other people don't care about that because their only concern and their highest objective is getting Kamala Harris in office. And so they can deprioritize a genocide. They can deprioritize ethnic cleansing. all of these people are getting killed, raped, being used as human shields. Joanne Reed and the people on MSNBC, they don't care about that in lieu of getting their person in office. The college campuses was the focal point of that rage and indignation. And so the idea that you're having outreach to the same people that you are fundamentally ignoring is a bit rich. It's a bit rich. I'm sorry. Let's keep going. Let her finish her point.
For governor in that state, and the thought that, defeating him would also carry Harris in. But in the end, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears happened in that state, is that if you can't flip enough white women, and we've talked about this on this set numerous times, is that you have a state where you've got a 6-week abortion or a 12-week abortion. I think theirs might be 12 weeks.
Yep.
But it's a state where women lost their reproductive rights, where there was a very heavy push to get women to focus on not putting in place, re-electing, putting back into the White House the person who was responsible for taking those rights away and restoring them. But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity.
Oh, that is rich. That is rich. You can always expect Joanne Reed to give an assessment of ridiculousness. So the problem and the issue is white women. White women were insufficiently loyal to Kamala Harris. I would really appreciate one day for one of the people who's sitting there that turns around and says something like, as Democrats, we have a problem. And to go in an explanation of what that problem is. As opposed to, well, blacks were insufficiently loyal. White women didn't come out in the numbers that we needed white women to come out. Hispanics and their proximity to whiteness is the reason why they vote for Donald Trump. There's all these excuses. Whether Joanne Reed realizes it or not, people vote for who they think is in their best interest. That's it. If the Democratic Party cannot convince those people to vote for them, that is on the Democratic Party. And that is a problem of the Democratic Party. It is their responsibility to come up with a message, to come up with an argument that entices and brings people to the polling locations, that gets them fired up, that has a certain amount of enthusiasm built into it. Do you honestly believe that people were jazzed up for Liz Cheney? And more to the point about the Liz Cheney thing, has Liz Cheney ever even said that she agreed with anything Kamala Harris wanted to do with the exception of foreign policy? It's weird. It's strange. And for whatever reason, they full well believed that this was going to be the thing that jazzed up the public and pulled in the Republican vote. Hillary Clinton 2.0, believing that I can get rid of the left because A, the left has nowhere else to go and they don't want Trump, so they would vote for me. And so I can reach out to Republicans that are disaffected by Trump. From the Republican side, they're looked at it as, if we can beat Trump here, we can take back the party. So it was a merger of joining forces with this idea of stopping Trump. That didn't work. I mean, fact of the matter is, Liz Cheney is a lunatic, and it's not popular. And all things being equal, there's a faction of the Republican Party that may not like Trump. By the same token, at the point where you're calling them trash and Hitler and Nazis or deplorables, that is not necessarily the most soothing message to get people on your side. And more to the point about that, you can convince people who already agree with you. But the issue boiled down to independents. And from their point of view, this kind of disaffected Republicans. But you have marginalized your base in the process of doing that. They seem to believe that you can ignore the left and just get people on the right. And if you can get enough people who are on the right, the left will have nowhere else to go, and you can have a captive left while also getting Republicans. That's the plan. That was the idea. We don't want to have to attend to the issues of the left. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the right. We're going to try to get right-wingers, and we're going to tell the left, you have nowhere else to go. We're least worst, so you should vote us in. It didn't work. It didn't work under Clinton. And it didn't work under Kamala. Back to the drawing board. Now, I guess the question becomes, now what? Now what? What do Democrats do? What is their, what is the next iteration of the Democratic Party? Where do they go? Politically, what are they, or what do they become? If somebody says, what does it mean to be a Democrat today? I would say it means censorship. It means this notion of trying to deal with free speech and get rid of free speech. I would say it's elitist. They don't seem to understand how other people considers or perceives them. They're pro-war. They don't necessarily believe in negotiations. They're pro-genocide. They have very low standards and willing to pretty much accept anything, meaning blue no matter who. These are not the most flattering portrayals of the Democratic Party, but this is what they've become. And when the rest of the public is looking at this, and I'm saying this from the left, by the way, so it's not like I'm a right-winger. I would have never voted for Trump. I voted for Jill Stein. I guess my point is they don't see themselves in the way that other people see them because they're elitists, because they believe that we're the rational and pragmatic group. Then if we need to get rid of free speech, then that's obviously the best way to go because we're the rational and pragmatic group. If we need to corral, quote unquote, misinformation because people are coming to assessments that we don't necessarily like, then we can do that because we're the pragmatic group. If we need to engage in one war after the next and avoid any kind of negotiation because we need to be able to dictate terms because we're Americans and we are full of hubris. Okay, well, meaning that becomes an orthodoxy that fundamentally fails and needs to change. It needs to change. I'm sorry, it just does. The party is insufficient. They're incapable of having a challenge, even against somebody like Donald Trump, which I would argue is not an issue of white women. It's not an issue of blacks. It's not an issue of Hispanics. It's not an issue of the Russians. It is purely an issue for the Democratic Party itself. And one of the things that I will put out, when Sanders ran back in 2016 and 2020, it made it very clear that regardless of what they say they are, they're not those things. Meaning, the way Democratic Party enunciates their values and what they're supposed to believe in and their standards, that is just Sanders. All things being equal, Sanders is what they claim to be. But if you notice, when Sanders got into the race, they did any and everything in their power to get rid of him. Chris Matthews goes so far as to say, well, maybe it's better to let Trump win because if Sanders takes it, he's going to take the party for a generation. That was their point of view. If Sanders takes it, whatever it means to be a Democrat is going to fundamentally change, and we can't have that. They understood what was going on, and they decided this is not what we want. The Republican Party is going through something very similar with Trump, that even though Trump won that first time around, he set his, let's say, character on the Republican Party on some level. You get the people like the John Boltons of the world, the Mike Pompeos of the world, the, what's her name, the Dick Cheney and Heels, I can't think of her name, it'll come to me in a moment, Nikki Haley's of the world. You get these people who fundamentally want to take their party back. They want it to be this pro-war, muscular foreign policy America. By the same token, Trumpism and his point of view of being willing to make deals and everything else seems to be the standard currently for the Republican Party. Now, whether Trump goes through with it or not, who the hell knows? Like I said, Trump is a wild card. I'm just saying, on the ballot was whether or not we continue in these wars. That was on the ballot. Ukraine was on the ballot. Whether Trump would work with other countries around the world, let's say like North Korea, that was on the ballot. All of these things were on the ballot. And they lost. Liberals have no issue with killing, drone bombing, invading countries, and the chaos that that allows. And the fact that they were willing to back a genocide in order to get their candidate elected shows you they have zero standards. It is impossible for you to tell me that you have some standard somewhere, and yet you would back a genocide in order to get Kamala Harris elected. That is literally blue no matter who. That is literally one concentration camp less that they were willing to support. And they were willing to look you in the eye and tell you a genocide is not all that bad because we need to get Harris elected. That is utterly and entirely disgusting. And it's a deranged argument to make. That is the argument, however, they made over and over and over again. When Obama would come out, when Kamala Harris would say, hey, abortion matters more than, the fact that we're committing a genocide and we're backing it. And they would always hide the ball as if what is happening over there is somehow separate and distinct from America. Despite the fact that we're paying for it. We're paying for it. Just outrageous. Margaret Kimberly is going to be joining me shortly. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. You guys are listening to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. If you dig the content, if you like the content, definitely give it a like. Definitely subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. I'm here from Monday through Friday, 7 to 10. I also pop up all times of the day. If you really are digging the content, consider helping the channel, either through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. I enjoy your Super Chats, and I read them. I'll read them out loud, provided they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted, or anything else. And like I said, it helps the show. It really does support the content and really does keep this channel going. So every little bit helps, even $1. I'm going to take a quick break. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Back in a moment.
The Latino vote is really interesting. Some of these numbers are a little bit jaw-dropping looking at.
All right, we got to interrupt here. This is a spokesperson for the Harris.
Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I hope you guys are doing well this morning. If you guys like the content, give it a like, share it, subscribe it. My objective is to get 40,000 by Christmas. I need your help to do that. If you really dig the content, you can always support through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, provided they're not racist, bigoted, sexist, etc., etc. That's my spiel. Every little bit helps the show. I want to go into some of the other clips from MSNBC. They are the gift that keeps on giving. Because again, they don't seem to recognize, or for that matter, realize in any real degree what the ultimate problem is. They externalize it. They continuously externalize it. Hispanics are not voting for us. Blacks are insufficiently loyal. White women didn't get the job done. As if it's the responsibility of blacks, white women, and Hispanics to get your party elected. I think you've inverted the issue. And again, part of this issue of hubris, part of this issue of arrogance, is to live in a fog, and a fog that is basically a bubble. where when you talk to each other, you have a clear impression of the world. Unfortunately for you, that impression is not necessarily shared with everybody else in the country. So from the Democratic point of view, something is wrong with these people. There's something wrong with them. How were they raised, according to Joe Scarborough? What is their upbringing? Oh, for that matter, what is wrong with these Hispanics? Our country is sick. Maybe our country doesn't believe in democracy. This is the stuff that liberals have been on air saying because of the laws. And again, they're saying this about somebody who didn't even go through the primary process. Joy-Ann Reid. Joy-Ann Reid. Let's go back to her and hear more of what she has to say. Oh, my guest is here. Let me bring in my guest. Give me 1 second. And this, and this. The one and only Margaret Kimberly.
Good
And just to
morning.
give you a heads up, Margaret Kimberly, she is senior columnist and editor for the Black Agenda Report and author of Presidential Black Americans and the Presidents. You can follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her new work at blackagendareport.com. Margaret, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I am doing great, better that you are with me. Give me, just before we even start, your take on what took place last night. Donald Trump is the new president-elect of the United States. Kamala Harris lost. She did not come out and give a concession speech. That is a pet peeve of mine. But all things being equal, liberals have been melting down over this, and they seem to be utterly and completely baffled by how Donald Trump won. Give me your take on this.
Well, it's funny. Am I echoing?
Oh, yeah, 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Okay, there we are. That should be better.
Okay, good. All right, no echo. Great. I'm reminded, it's very funny. Yesterday, I got a Facebook reminder that a year before, last November 5th, David Axelrod, one of the chief Democratic Party strategists, expressed concern about Biden's popularity and the need to ask whether or not he should be running for re-election.
Right.
I think they should have eased Biden out after the 2022 midterms and made plans for someone else to run, but for whatever reasons, they did not. They were stuck with the bad candidate. Then he failed in the debate. By then it was June. And so they chose to just plop Kamala Harris in. They didn't even have an open convention, which could have given an appearance of democracy. But so they chose this woman who was liked only by rich Democratic donors. She's a I mean, this is someone who, I call her the hollow woman.
Yeah.
She can't literally has difficulty expressing herself. The nervous laugh, the word salad. This is someone who's not even, it seems, not sure of herself at all.
Right.
I don't think she thinks about anything seriously. I don't think any issues are important. She's just ambitious, and she had the right friends and ended up being vice president.
Yeah.
And the end result, and at this moment of crisis, Palestine, Joe Biden has been leading a genocide for the last year, and it is turning people's stomachs. Most people want a ceasefire. They may have a range of opinions about Israel or U.S. foreign policy, but they want the killing to end. And there were people who refused to vote for genocide.
Yes.
Also, there was no recognition of the phoniness of Biden, most progressive since FDR, all that, cut and child, all that nonsense. And then trying to tell people, oh, you are doing well. You're just too dumb to know it because this or that indicator that has nothing to do with your life shows the economy doing well. So she was Biden 2.0. He was not popular. She was not popular. She didn't talk about the things that her website for 50 days. She had a campaign website with nothing on it. I mean, that's where they show their stuff. That's where they pander or sloganeer or something. And then when they finally put something up, it was a bad copy and paste of what Biden had been saying. So she's inauthentic.
You know what's wild about this, and I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
The wild part about it to me, I think what happened was that Joe Biden assumed that he was going to run again because he didn't believe that Kamala Harris was strong enough to carry the election. And because he didn't believe she was strong enough to carry the election, his thought was, I'm going to run, I'm going to win, and then I'm going to wedge her in as VP. I strongly think that's what he was planning on doing. He was going to step down. I don't think anybody believes that Biden could have won another 4 years.
Mhm.
But it didn't work that way. The moment that the debate flamed out, the question becomes, okay, now what? If Joe Biden steps down, who are we going to put in that spot? And I think for them, oh, I'm sorry. Ah, damn it. The audience didn't hear that. Let me start at the beginning. I think for them, they ran into a problem of what are we going to do about Biden, especially when he flamed out in the debate. And I think initially in the beginning, their point of view was, well, Kamala Harris is not strong enough to win an election on her own, meaning we can't put her in to run because she's going to lose. So Joe Biden has to run. And when Joe Biden wins, we'll put Kamala Harris in as the president and Joe Biden can step down. It didn't work that way. When Joe Biden flamed out, they were stuck with a problem. Okay, we have 3 months to go. How can we leap to somebody else? Meaning, how can you put a Newsom in when Kamala Harris is the VP? Exactly. And so they figured we're stuck with Harris and we're going to run with it. In the very beginning, she did get this kind of glow, at least for the first month or two. But it seems like the moment she started talking, it all fell apart. From your point of view, why do you think it fell apart? Like, I have this theory of the case in regards to what I think went wrong over the course of her campaign, meaning let's make everything else out of it and just go, okay, did she have a chance as she was running in the campaign? Because there were various points in the campaign where her polling was much stronger than Trump's. Yeah. I guess my question would be, what do you think happened? What changed? Why did last month it seems that the bottom fell out of her campaign?
Well, let's talk about what she was saying. She spent the last month talking about Republicans supporting her. Liz Cheney, I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet. I'm going to have a bipartisan commission advising me. It was all about this outrage to these non-existent never Trumpers. There aren't any never Trumpers. They're like unicorns. They don't exist. You know, people want to believe that only people who wear MAGA hats and go to rallies are going to vote for Trump. No.
Right.
Republicans voted for, and they had a primary. Trump won the Republican primary. He solidified Republican voters. And so they want him. He's their guy. Even when he lost in 2020, he got 74 million votes.
Yes,
it was a record-setting vote count for a loser. So there was always this huge reservoir of support for him that Democrats don't want to admit exists. And you've got to stop with this, you know, they're all brainwashed and they're all toothless rednecks and knuckle-dragging yahoos. And enough. That doesn't help you any when you've got to count votes. And I also want to say Trump supporters are no more indoctrinated than anybody else.
That's right.
We have people today, you know, all kinds of foolishness, blaming this blame thing. It's the Green Party. It's Latino men. What's wrong with white women? Just promote your party. And she didn't do that. She didn't say anything about what she was going to do for the people that was coherent. This opportunity economy, you might get up to $25,000 to buy a house, and we might have a loan for some people, and black men are going to get crypto. I can't think of anything she said that people could hang on to and want to support her.
No, I agree with you. I mean, because, you know, when Axios came out with the report and they were calling Trump Hitler and a fascist, and Trump wants to execute Liz Cheney, I mean, just outlandish stuff. Donald Trump was having this argument about peace and we need to avoid these wars. And they flipped that into he wants to execute Liz Cheney because, of course, he's Hitler and fascist and blah, 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 blah. Axios pointed out to her, this isn't working. Stop doing that. Tell people what you are and what you represent. And for whatever reason, she didn't seem to get the message at all. Do you think that this is going to give, because you're right, Joy Ann Reid came out and said white women didn't support her enough. Do you think this is going to cause a crisis or some level of introspection or an autopsy in the Democratic Party going forward?
Unfortunately, no. I don't think there's going to be any analysis in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party elites are people who they're just untouched by everybody else. And if what they do doesn't work, they just shrug their shoulders and act like it's not a problem. What did they do with Hillary Clinton? The same people are Democratic Party consultants. So no, they're not going to question anything that they did. They will justify, which is actually what most of us do as individuals when something goes wrong. We justify our actions. So I don't see any introspection among them. But what makes me sadder, I don't see any introspection among rank and file Democrats either. It's the same tired thing. It's just racist white people. What's wrong with white women? Why did almost half of Hispanic men vote for him? Why does anybody vote? They're like abused kids who are scared of, the dad who's going to beat them, who never, ever, I have to push people. I have to say, well, wait a second. Isn't this two-way? Whatever the Republicans said, whatever Trump said or did, wasn't there a countervailing force? How can you talk about this and not talk about how the Democrats messed up?
Exactly.
So you have this person who literally, when I call her the hollow woman, I'm being polite. Her answer to every question was, I came from a middle-class family, like a robot, because she doesn't have that touch that most politicians do, where they're able to convey some connection to ordinary people, but she didn't have it. So that's why there was nothing on her website, because there was nothing there.
She came across as deeply inauthentic. Over and over and over again, she came across as inauthentic. Now, I agree with you on this, and I don't see any soul searching either. And any Democrat that I've talked to, it's always been, well, they're uneducated, they're uninformed. If they were more informed, they'd vote for the Democratic. And as I pointed out, I said, look, you guys are in a bubble, you guys are elitists, and they would be aghast by it. What do you mean we're elitists? What do you mean we're in a bubble? And I would point out, it's like, what about these wars that you guys are involved in? You're attacking Trump for these wars. And they would say, well, yeah, because he wants to talk with dictators. Like everything that you throw at them, they don't seem to accommodate how the rest of the public perceives it or perceives them. Right. And they just seem to be in a bubble. I guess my question is, what happens to the Democratic Party now going forward? Who is the next person to come in? Is like, now that they've lost, I guess the question becomes now what?
Well, I think what should happen is Democratic voters need to start the process of deprogramming themselves. That's what ought to happen. I mean, the rich people are going to do what they do. The Kamala Harris raised more than twice as much as Trump.
Yeah.
$1 billion. He raised like 400 million. She raised $1 billion. Yeah. So finance capital prefers the Democrats. So they will always have people to give them money. But it's up to the rank and file members of that party to start questioning, start questioning Democratic Party leadership and start questioning themselves, which I think is the hardest part. Because a lot of what both of us have mentioned is this feeling of superiority. We're just better because, we think abortion should be legal and we don't own a gun. And, speaking of things that made her look inauthentic, remember when she was bragging about being a gun owner? I mean, that was so hilarious to me. Thinking that anybody for whom gun ownership is that big an issue is already a Republican. So she was appealing to no one.
Well, the border thing too, by the way, like she's making this argument like she's hard on the border. And it's like, okay, why are you doing that? Nobody buys the premise. If they believe you're a border czar and they believe you failed at the border. Why are you now going to the border? Like it was a few of those issues where I felt that. I mean, the Republican Party or people believe Trump was going to be better on the economy. People believe Trump was going to be better on inflation. Like there were certain things that Trump had this kind of lead on. The fascinating thing to me is that for everything that Trump went through, I mean, he nearly was shot twice, impeached twice, convicted in a court of law, 90 different indictments hanging over his head, gets called a sexual abuser. And yet they could not come up with a cohesive argument to justify a vote for them over Trump. And one of the things they were pointing out was that Donald Trump was increasing his margins. I want to play this clip for you. This was taking place, I believe, on CNN. Listen to what this guy says. And I want to make the point after the fact. This is clip number 3, I believe. Let's see. This, and this. Not this one. This one. Okay.
In terms of the way people feel things are going in the United States. Nationally, only 7% of voters say they're enthusiastic. 19% say they're satisfied. Look at these numbers. 43% dissatisfied, 29% angry, 72% of the electorate nationally say they're dissatisfied or angry. What about America's best?
Think about that. 72% of the American public is either dissatisfied or 72% of the American public is either dissatisfied or angry. Not just, unhappy, angry. And Harris, when asked, are you going to do something different? Her answer is, I can't think of anything different I would do.
I came from a middle-class family. That was always
that right.
Well, when there's that level of dissatisfaction, it means the party in power is going to lose. So they can hardly not lose. Now, I don't think this is a problem for everybody in this country, that people think their material conditions will change because Donald Trump is president instead of Biden. That's not true. That they're not going to change the capitalist system at all. No. That's what's causing everyone's suffering is capitalism. And that's not going to change. So Trump isn't going to change that. But people want to do something, change something. And we're told it matters who the president is. It's the most important election ever. So people say, okay, I'm not happy. I guess I better change and vote for Trump. I also noticed that it seems there were fewer votes cast yesterday than there were in 2020. Just a quick glance. It seems that there was lower participation, which is not surprising to me. But you said something about everything Trump has been through, the impeachments, January 6th, being convicted of a felony, of the rape civil case, and it all bounces off of him. And I think that makes him appealing to many people. The fact that he says, F everybody else, I want to run again, I'm running. That alone makes him appeal. There are people for whom he's like, wow, that guy's got balls, or, he's not afraid, or, the usual. He speaks my mind, meaning he speaks their minds. And even when he lost, as I said, with a huge number of votes. So I'm surprised that he could win again. You have to have a strong candidate against him. And I also think they were lucky when Biden won in 2020. I was not thinking Biden was going to win. So I think they lucked out. Yeah. And unfortunately, they did not see that. And they thought the same old was going to work. There was something else that happened. The COVID programs disappeared. Right. Those were very important. Even those little stimulus payments helped people. The child tax credit, people being allowed to be on Medicaid and SNAP, eviction protections, all of those things helped people. Yeah. Even though they weren't adequate, it helped a lot of people. And then it was gone. Yeah. And we were told Build Back Better would bring them back, but there was no Build Back Better. So, this phony story about him being the most progressive president since FDR, it was a lie. So there were people who, had they acted on even some of that, who probably stayed home yesterday, who probably didn't bother voting at all. Yeah. I mean, I've met plenty of people who would say, man, I work 2 jobs. I don't see how my vote translates into anything immaterially in my life. And you can imagine that unless you're a politico where you're just interested in politics, okay, well, that's demoralizing. It's like, why am I going to get out? I have 2 kids. I have 2 jobs. I don't see how me doing this and making this vote affects my life in any real tangible way. That is demoralizing. And last night I did the map before the election. And for me, my map came out actually
pretty damn accurate, with the exception of Michigan. I wasn't sure where Michigan was going to go. Michigan, however, went red. Now, of all the states, I was praying that Michigan did not go to Harris. Because from my point of view, I wanted the Muslim community to be able to give a big FU to the Democratic Party for allowing all of that to take place, basically on Joe Biden's watch. 70%, some of the data came out, we're paying more than 70% of all of the genocide, all of the killing, all of the slaughter, all of the kids in cages, all of the rapes, all of that stuff. We're paying 70% of that. And so when they ignored Michigan, they ignored the Palestinian to get it on the DNC stage, I was praying that Michigan stands up and says, go F yourself. And apparently Michigan did just that.
Yes, I'm very happy. You know, they needed to be punished.
Yes.
Joe Biden prioritized the genocide above everything else.
Yep.
He didn't care about his own people. He didn't care about the future of the party. Just to say that, you know, Israel gets to keep killing people as long as they want. And I agree with those people who say it was important for them to be punished. It really was. And but you're right. None of it could have happened without the U.S. And as late as last week, Biden's like, it's not a genocide. We've been watching this for a year now. Not even an attempt to cover it up or sugarcoat. No, it's not a genocide. Telling us you can't believe your lying eyes. And this was an affront to millions of people, the revulsion that people feel that they see a genocide occurring, which could not happen without the support of their government. And then to be told you have to shut up about it. Yep. Well, of course and you have somebody who's not offering you anything. Well, of course she lost.
Yeah, it's dispiriting. I mean, the idea that my tax dollars is going to that level of chaos. And then you get that psychopath, Matthew Miller, getting up there and explaining away everything. Or John Kirby, who cried, wept tears when the Ukrainian military was getting crushed. And then when it's, you know, Israel kills more kids in that, well, like 3 or 4 months than have died in the entire war in Ukraine. And John Kirby's like, well, war is hell. It's just war. It's the way it is. Like, they had a complete lack of sympathy, a lack of any kind of empathy for the people that were being put into those Holocaust-like conditions. And they didn't care. And so I love the fact that Michigan, overwhelming majority of Muslims in that country or in that state, basically said, you are not getting our support and you're going to be punished as a direct result for supporting this policy. Trump is hypothetical. You are doing this now. Man, you have no idea how appreciative I am of that. I did not want them to get away with that. And I didn't want this thing where you could back a genocide and still win. I just, you know, I kept saying either you can back a genocide or you can run in a political race. You shouldn't be able to do both. Going forward, what do you think from a standpoint of either, I guess, any of these policies? What do you think Trump starts? And again, I am not a supporter of Trump. I didn't like either of these candidates, but where do you think he starts?
That's a good question. He's going to start wherever he wants. He got a choice. He controls both houses. You got a popular vote, both houses of Congress. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. I think he's going to start with immigration. That's his. That was another issue. We can't leave that out. This sudden. This huge wave of migration, irregular migration, you call it. Now they say people were admitted as asylum seekers, but it's a broken system.
Right.
That, and it doesn't mean you hate immigrants or you're a racist, but it just doesn't work very well for people to be able to show up. And many of them get in. No preparation for the new arrivals. That makes people angry. Now, the Republicans, the Democratic answer was to have more enforcement at the border, but Trump, being Trump, told Republicans not to cooperate and to kill this bill because it, you know, would have stolen some of his thunder.
Now, to be fair to Trump, we've had an immigration judge come on the show, and he pointed out that the bill that Joe Biden was doing would have in no way dealt really with the immigration issue. Like, for example, the idea that somebody comes into the country, 10 years, they can languish, and they get told 90% of the time that they have to leave. Okay, that's outrageous. Not having enough judges was another issue, but also in many respects, we didn't know who was coming into the country. So let's say if you're doing, let's say Haiti, or you're doing Venezuela, where we don't really have diplomatic ties with the country, anybody who you're bringing in, you have no capacity to check who the person is. Like, some of the stuff was just stuff that they did poorly in order to try to make the numbers go down. Like, what is this CBP app, where the person can sign in online, and then all of a sudden, like, that stuff was weird. That stuff didn't necessarily work all that well. And Donald Trump, he hit it on the head. And yeah, you're right. It would have taken some of his thunder away. Yeah, I agree with you. He's probably going to start on immigration.
I think so too. And let's be clear on immigration. Biden deported more Haitians than Trump did. It's always the Democrats who deport more. It was the same thing with Obama. Trump actually deported fewer people than Obama did. But I think he's going to start with immigration. And I think it was a funny thing. Trump said in his debate with Biden, he made his infamous remark about black jobs. These migrants are taking black jobs. Being who he is, this unreconstructed racist, if he had said they're taking jobs black people used to have, because that's something black people say. They're taking our jobs. I see it's just these migrants, with lower paying working class jobs is what people are talking about. But Trump messed it up, because black people, that would have resonated with black people actually, if he had said they're taking jobs black people used to have, but people pretended not to know what he meant and say black jobs were, something he was not saying. But my point is, I'm rambling a little bit, but the issue of immigration is one that resonates with a lot of people. Yeah. And I believe it's one of the reasons he got so many votes, because it was something, I don't think people believe that Haitians were eating dogs and cats, but they do not like the fact that the border seems to be open. There seems to be no one minding the store. They don't understand what the rules are. People are admitted, and cities like New York were overwhelmed by people who needed housing. New York has, and it's a good thing, guarantees shelter. So we have a big shelter system. Anybody who asks for shelter gets it, but it's not meant for people to just show up one day and ask for shelter the next. So this created strains on many cities. So I believe I think that's where he'll start. And he'll do what, his billionaire backers want him to do. I don't know what that is. Now, in foreign policy, it's hard to say, because, on Ukraine, he was like, we need to stop funding Ukraine. But then he's the one who did the deal. He's the one who told Mike Johnson to support this latest tranche of funding to Ukraine. So I don't know if he's really going to change that at all. It's reported that he told Netanyahu, you got to wrap this up. What does that mean? You got to stop killing people. You can kill as many people as you want until January 20th. It's not clear.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. I mean, it sounds like he told Netanyahu, you need to wrap this up before I get into office. Basically, get this done. And yeah, for Ukraine, I have no idea. Like, Trump is such a wild card that Russia has already made clear what it would take to end the war. Whether Trump is going to acquiesce to that, I have no idea. There's this other question of sanctions. Trump was talking about basically stopping the sanctions against Russia because it's damaging the dollar. That was something else he pointed out. And what's wild about it, that is not something that the Democrats even brought up. Like, you have BRICS that's taking place. You have all of these countries that are trying to find ways to get around the dollar and de-dollarize. Trump at least was like, I'm going to use sanctions to attack those countries. Okay, that's stupid. That's not going to work. It's going to hasten the end of the dollar. But at the very least, he seems to have some kind of cognition or some awareness that, hey, those countries seem to be getting together. I've been working in collaboration with one another. From your point of view, and I can end it on this one, if you had to explain to a Democratic friend, they are crying, they're teary-eyed, they say Hitler has taken over, it's fascist America. Jonathan Capehart said America clearly doesn't believe in democracy since they voted for Trump. What do you say to them? How do you explain to them that they're in a bubble and that they lost? How do you get that across to them in a way that would make sense to them?
I mean, it's hard to tell people they're in a bubble when it's difficult talking to people frankly sometimes, because you want to say, get your head out of your butt. You know, what's wrong with you that you don't see? But that's not the way to try to win people over in an argument. I would just tell people the Democratic Party is not your party. They fail. And then when they win, what do you get when they win? What do you get? So people they always can pull the, Supreme Court card or something, a legitimate issue you're concerned about. But, and I want to tell people too, you survived Trump. I didn't want Trump. I lived through Trump. It's like, did my life change? Did your life change because Trump was in?
That's right.
No, you got Supreme Court justices you didn't want. I'm not going to say that's not an important issue, but you survived Trump. You'll survive him again. And just giving into this hysteria that's whipped up by people who failed you again, who don't even bother to do the minimum to help you out so they can stay in office. Look at what they do, not what they say, not what FDR did, not LBJ's social programs. What have they done for you lately? And all they can talk about is Obamacare. And now that's almost 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh,
so
wow.
It's like, what, 14 years ago or something?
Back 2008.
Yeah. So that's what I would say to people. You have to think, don't give in to despair. A friend of mine texted me, 4 years of misery. And I'm like, I'm not going to be miserable the next 4 years. I'm going to do what I've been doing. You're going to keep doing what you're doing. And we have to, start questioning. And it's going to be hard for people because they're so indoctrinated, especially for liberals, about their superiority, looking down on people who don't agree with them. And they have to stop. They have to stop. And it's a slow process. But, as I've said before, I've said to people, well, what did the Democrats do? They had part in this race. What did they do? At least look at them logically and ask yourself how this could have been avoided. So what I want people, especially Black people, I want Black people to dump the Democrats. This idea that our political activity amounts to little more than keeping Republicans out of office, and that's the only thing we can or should do. It has to die. She didn't even bother. They usually throw in something about voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. They stuck his basically returning the enforcement provisions to the Voting Rights Act. They didn't even bother saying that.
Nope.
I mean, just basic stuff. And then expect people to come out, I call them low motivation voters. Why should they be motivated though? It's like, I'm not going to criticize them because they see people are blowing smoke at them. Yeah. But so Black people, we have to wake up. We've got to dump the Democratic Party. We've got to stop seeing them being in office as, that's all we can do. We're these little supplicants. And our only job politically is to keep Republicans out of the White House. And if we do that, we can breathe a sigh of relief while the prison population remains unchanged, while police are still killing us, while we can't afford to buy homes, while our money goes to Ukraine or to weapons manufacturers so that people can die all over the world. That has to end. But it's going to be hard because as humans, it's hard to change, isn't it? It's hard to acknowledge you need to change.
Well, what I wish, and I agree with you with the Black vote, I wish that African Americans would look at what Ethiopians did, Ethiopians and Eritreans, and what the Arabs did and Muslims did in Michigan. Basically, we have a standard. There's a bottom line that we are not willing to go beyond in supporting a particular candidate. And I really, honest to God, believe that the Democrats had those standards, that you can't get elected by supporting a genocide. You can't get elected by being okay with having all of these wars. You can't get elected by not pushing for a minimum wage. Basically, they have a low bar where you say, I'm not going below this bar, nor can a candidate get elected when they do. I would have thought genocide would have been that line, but apparently not so much. Margaret, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me today. Always appreciate you joining me. And just to give the audience a good send-off, Margaret Kimberly, she's a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Presidential, Black America and the Presidents. You can follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her work on blackagendareport.com. Margaret, always appreciate having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you. All right. The one and only Margaret Kimberly. Always appreciate her joining me. Always love her analysis. She is usually on point. And of course, she usually brings in the fire. And I can't say she is wrong. I think everything that came out of her mouth is indeed correct. I want to go to the chats for a bit. It seems like we have a few right here. Until they're sentenced, you're not a felon. Look it up. Fair enough. Wait a minute. There we are. You're not a felon. Look it up. I believe you. I don't have to look it up. Let's see. What's the other one? Do you think aliens will visit President Trump's White House? Example, will he be the disclosure president? I don't think so, man. I mean, Trump doesn't necessarily seem to have a big interest in the UFO thing, even though Joe Rogan brought it up on the show. He just kind of dances around it. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, there's stuff in those files and blah, 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 blah. We couldn't even get him to release the JFK files. Now, he said he's going to do it. Is he? Who knows? Let's see, the next one. The bourgeois did a similar choice in 1930, fascism rather than communism. For 3 primaries, it's been Trump rather than Sanders. The failure of the left is the rise of the right. And I keep saying the center was legit. Meaning, if you had a center in your political space, and the center did what it was supposed to do, meaning attended to the needs of the population, there is no far right or far left candidate in that context, because the center holds. It's doing its job. The reality of it is, when the center stops doing its job, that's when people start looking for other things. Okay, this is not working for me. This tool, this device is not doing what I need it to do. And you start looking around, okay, well, what about that tool? What about that guy? What about that guy? And you would get policies that are a little bit more extreme than the center, because people are looking for something that works. And if the center is not doing the job, they will go looking elsewhere. The same thing is true for media, by the way. For all of this talk of, oh, we have misinformation and disinformation, and we need to stop people from being able to communicate and give information X or Y. The only reason people would go to these alternate sources is because sources that are supposed to be credible got it wrong. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Russia didn't blow up its own pipeline. The Israel thing didn't start on October 7th. You can go down the list. Hamas did want a deal. Israel did not want a deal. Netanyahu has no interest in a deal. He is going on a killing spree and ethnically cleansing. Blinken did lie when he said that Israel was not starving the population. It was clear as day that they were doing just that. I'm pointing out that in one situation after the next, they have fundamentally lied to the American public. Putin wants to go all through Europe. Yeah, with 150,000 people, he's apparently going to attack all these countries in Europe. It makes zero sense. But they would say it. And then they would be shocked when the public thinks, well, the media is lying. Oftentimes, they are. Think about the last thing the media put out over the weekend. Donald Trump wants to execute Liz Cheney. A speech or conversation with Tucker Carlson about ending wars gets flipped into Trump wants to assassinate or put Liz Cheney on a firing squad. Outrageous. When they say stuff like that, they don't quite understand that when people realize, okay, I'm being lied to, then they believe they're being lied to. You lose credibility. And in losing your credibility, people will look for other sources of information that they consider to be more right. You can't blame people for that. That's your fault. You had one job, and that job was get the news correct. Give them an honest take. What is a contextual version of the story that gives them some level of context to what's basically taking place? It's not to lie to them. It's not to just repeat propaganda that is coming out of either the Ukrainian government, the Israeli government, or our own government. And for all of this talk of misinformation, what do you really think that the government would declare as misinformation? Do you think that the government would declare anything that it puts out as misinformation? Meaning the government says something about something. The government often lies. Is the government and whatever monitors that they have, is it going to really point out that what the government said there as a lie was misinformation? Or is it going to point out that anything that somebody says to counteract and to give a true assessment, are they going to call the true assessment misinformation? Because my point of view is these things are going to be relative to one another. When the federal government says something, it's kind of like a terrorist. That guy's a terrorist. Okay, well, yeah, in the other context, the guy's a freedom fighter. You're trying to overthrow that government. You have all of these people that rise up to prevent you from overthrowing the government. You call them a terrorist. They consider themselves freedom fighters. Meaning, it's very possible that the use of terms like misinformation, disinformation, are entirely relative to the person who's saying it. So if Clinton says Russia got Trump elected, and the government puts out Russia got Trump elected, then me pointing out there's no evidence for that. You guys are making that up. You guys are using that to cover for Hillary Clinton. Well, the government would turn around and say, well, that's misinformation because the government's position is that Russia helped Trump get elected. I'm saying that it is deeply problematic for the government to be able to come up with a ministry of truth, especially when the government often lies. It's dangerous. When Harris is talking about we need to do something to Twitter, when John Kerry is saying we need to do something to the First Amendment, when Hillary Clinton said we need to lock people up who's putting out misinformation, which is just radically ironic, considering she is one of the main purveyors of disinformation. This is what these people are saying. It is worrying that the Democratic Party has gotten to the point of we are having difficulty winning our races. And because we're having difficulty, we're obviously the more pragmatic. We're often the brighter people. And because we're the brighter people and the more pragmatic, people are just getting misinformation, which is the reason why we're losing. So we need to find a way to do something about the misinformation that people are getting. So we need to put constraints on Twitter. We need to put constraints on YouTube. We need to put constraints on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. We need to change how they put out information and what they put out information on, because obviously we can't get elected under the model to which we're operating. Meaning their issue, it's not about quote unquote disinformation. It's not about misinformation. The issue is that they are often getting contradicted with the stories that they put out that are just fundamentally not true, or they've dropped all context in those stories for purely political expedience. That is exactly what happened with the Trump wants to execute Liz Cheney stuff. That is exactly what happened with unprovoked attack on Ukraine by the Russians. Or for that matter, it all started on October 7th and that was the greatest tragedy ever. They're lying. And they're dropping context to do it. Iran attacked Israel. Well, Iran was retaliating against Israel because Israel murdered Haniyeh sitting in the goddamn embassy. Or not the embassy, but during the presidential election in Tehran. They're going to drop the context that Israel did that. They're going to drop the context that Israel has been killing and bombing all of its neighbors and everything else. And when you bring up the number of deaths, the number of civilians, they would say, well, war is rough, and we've asked Israel to not do that. And as a reporter will point out, but you've asked them this for over a year. You don't get sick of asking them? And at which point do you bring in sanctions? Which point do you stop giving weapons? At which point do you start using diplomatic pressure in the context of the United Nations to maybe even expel them for acting as a rogue state? When do you do that? Meaning it's one thing to send a strongly worded letter. It's another thing to remove the blank check. The issue is the blank check. I'm sorry, the speech thing bothers me deeply. I mean, you must understand, they eliminated my job because they didn't like us saying what we were saying. And as I've told you before, my job at Radio Sputnik was just to tell the truth. What's correct. It's not like, if you had a propaganda outlet, it's not like you have to make stuff up The reality of this, the U.S. government lies so extensively as a basis of operation that your only job is what's true. It's the reason why I love the job so much. You're sitting on the moon, you're looking at events, what's true. It's frustrating, that's all. And the idea that they're going after speech is deeply concerning and problematic. Deeply concerning, disconcerting. Entitled people will never soul search. It's easier for them to externalize because to admit reality will require them to change. Change is hard. Agreed. Just as human beings, right? Change is hard. I just had losing a job is tough. Like, being on the right side of history is one thing, but to lose a job suddenly because the government decides that we don't like what you're saying, and so we are going to do an end run around the First Amendment to destroy your capability to do your job. You know, in Russia, when they were having the conference, you've had British reporters, you had American reporters, you had all of these different people that were there covering the event. And they asked, I think it was George Galloway, asked the guy, you don't think it's weird that you can have all of these reporters from Britain, from America, from France, and all of you guys are in Russia asking questions, but a Russian reporter couldn't do that in Europe or couldn't do that in America? And we are supposed to be the country of free speech? What the hell is that? How does that work? Meaning, whereas those outlets can operate in Russia, Russian media can't operate in Europe or the US. Think about that. Put that in context. Which one seems to be more confident in their point of view? In the old days, it wasn't that way. In the old days, we used to deride the Soviet Union because we had a free and open press. They were repressive. And so we were somehow philosophically, morally better. Okay, what about now? They've eliminated Radio Sputnik and RT in America. They've eliminated in Europe, basically saying we don't want an alternate point of view. We have one point of view that we want to instantiate into the public, and having an RT or a Sputnik contradicts that point of view. So even though we may be a small outlet, even that was too much for their opinion. It is a worrying development. They don't care about the First Amendment. And one of the political parties, Democratic Party specifically, wants to change it. And they have openly talked about changing it. And I'm saying the only reason they want to change it is because they've lost the capability of believing that they can win the argument. And misinformation is their new buzzword for it. Deborah Wilson, now more than ever, I've been hanging with you for a long time. Appreciate your dialogue. Oh, thank you, Deborah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Dee Marie, super sticker. Thank you, Marie. Leave a comment. Leave a comment. Democrats can't behave like fascists, push fascist policy, and accuse someone else of fascism falls on deaf ears. Janice, yes. Imagine for the moment you spend a year with pictures, images, pleas for help, seeing hospitals being blown up, mosques being blown up, tents being set on fire in the middle of the night. You see kids being shot, killed. You see people being run over with bulldozers. You see a literal extermination attempt by starving various people in northern Gaza, preventing any kind of food or humanitarian aid from getting into that area, or for that matter, destroying food and humanitarian aid, shooting people as they go to get food. Don't forget that one, where they opened up fire on all of these people who were starving because they hadn't been eating, and then they opened fire and shot all of these people trying to get bread. We pay for that. Meaning those are our policies that Joe Biden is sitting in office allowing. And they come to you and they say, hey, I know that looks bad, but Donald Trump is horrible. So despite the fact that we're paying for this, we're backing this, we're giving political support for this, Trump is worse. And so you should ignore that we're doing that. Also, by the way, we need to, corral your speech. So we need to put in a ministry of truth, which is what Joe Biden was trying to do. He just got caught with it. Nina Jankowicz, I believe. And people freaked out because they were trying to do an end run around the First Amendment where they could have these structures that are quasi-government to tell social media what's true and what's false. That's what they wanted to do. So all of the, hey, take this content down. Hey, don't allow this content. Shadow ban this content. We want you to remove this. That's what the government was doing to Twitter. And I guarantee you the same thing is true for Facebook or, for that matter, for YouTube. We need you to take this down. We need you to deprioritize this. We need you to get rid of this particular account. We need you to do that or this. All with the perspective of U.S. foreign policy. Now, if you're YouTube or if you are Facebook or Instagram and you say, we are willing to accept a Ukrainian position, we're willing to accept an Israeli position, we are not going to accept a Russian position, even if that position is correct, even if it's true, we're not going to accept it. So you have an outlet that is willing to give propaganda in one direction without any pushback from the other participation or participants in that conflict. And you run that across the board. Now, Twitter is a bit different because Twitter, at the very least, opened their platform, but they are attacking Elon Musk for that reason alone, that he was willing to basically say, look, this platform is going to be more in line of free speech as opposed to these other platforms and not playing that game. And they attacked him and derided him for it and claiming Elon Musk is putting out misinformation that's getting Donald Trump elected. I would argue, what is the misinformation? Now, when New York Times put out what they considered to be misinformation, the U.S. blew up the pipeline. Well, Joe Biden said he was going to blow it up, so that's not really misinformation now, is it? They hid Joe Biden's mental stuff. They did hide Joe Biden's mental infirmities when Kamala Harris said he's sharp as a tack every time I've seen him. Okay, well, obviously that's not true. When they say misinformation, my curiosity is always, okay, what is the misinformation that you are referring to? Oftentimes, they don't really bring it up. They just use it as this kind of esoteric thing that's out there that's somehow affecting people in the vote and as an explanation for why the Democrat fails miserably. But yeah, fascism. Fascism. My liberal wife is acting like a relative died. A mere farrier. From their point of view, it is kind of that way. Look, man, if you are a Democrat and you believe that Harris was going to win for some reason. Now, again, I looked at the map. I didn't see what she was going to win on the map, but whatever. You can imagine a bit of shock this morning, especially from the Democratic position. He's Hitler, he's racist, he's bigoted, he's a sexual abuser, he's a felon, he's add whatever adjective you want to add to it. In their minds, it is impossible to conceive, even when their own party is backing a genocide, that the public would choose Trump. Which is rather astonishing when you think about it. This guy has a body count that is breathtaking. Over 100,000 human beings, most of which being women and children. That is under Joe Biden. And liberals will look at that and say, yeah, that's bad, but it's not really happening to us. That's happening somewhere else. Trump is going to happen to us. And so the fact that like 100,000 women and children have been slaughtered matters less than Trump because Trump's an ogre. And as I keep pointing out, okay, I get that you think Trump is an ogre, but if your guy is backing a genocide and paying for that genocide and giving bullets, guns, and giving a blank check for it, then what the hell is your guy? How is he the ogre and your guy is not the ogre for doing it? They don't see it. It's a blind spot. In their mind, that's happening to somebody else, so we care less. Just outrageous. But yeah, liberty. Does this victory mean the end of American liberty? I mean, I guess the question is, did you have American liberty before? If you have a political party that wants to curtail your ability to speak, that wants to scream about democracy while simultaneously not having a primary. It's not like Harris won in a primary. The party that, polices your speech and the things that you say. Like, meaning, I didn't like either, to be frank. I thought Trump was incompetent. I think he's partially, on some level, racist. I don't know about the fascist stuff. They would have to show me the policy that he enacted. But as I told you before, it's a deal breaker to me to lose and not own up to the fact that you lost. The concession speech is one of the most important parts of the political space. So the fact that Donald Trump wasn't willing to accept his loss, to me, was a deal breaker. Forever. But American democracy, liberty, were those things really on the ballot? Was those things really on the ballot? And considering the orthodoxy, is this a show of democracy? What I mean by that is all of the newspapers, all of the television shows, you had world leaders, all of the lawfare, all of that stuff got involved in order to stop Trump from getting an election win. The Democrats were freaked out by it, hence the January 6th, hence the investigations, hence the criminal proceedings. I mean, keep in mind, the New York case, they wouldn't even bring that case before the DA, the current DA, got in because it was a bogus case. None of it worked. None of it worked. And despite everything that was being screamed at the American public, that American public still went out and made a democratic choice for Trump. Now, you don't have to like it. You don't even have to understand it. But Lord knows, it is a democratic choice, whether you like it or not. Military take an oath to protect Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Why they're not holding this administration and Congress accountable? Military take an oath to protect Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Why aren't they holding this administration accountable? Because they agree with the administration. I'll give you an example. The reports that came out just before Iran retaliated against Israel, and the reports, before Israel attacked Iran. And in those documents and in those reports, they point out that Israel has nuclear weapons, and there was a question of whether or not Israel was going to use those nukes in any kind of back and forth with Iran. Now, everybody knows that Israel has nukes, but it is not U.S. policy to out the fact that they have nukes. Meaning, U.S. policy keeps it mum, because the moment that you have to out the fact that they have nukes, certain things like the Non-Proliferation Act, certain policies that the U.S. government is supposed to follow come into play. We ignore those. We completely ignore those. When Blinken and Hochstein was selected by Joe Biden as being the envoy for Lebanon. All right. Hochstein was a IDF soldier at one point. So Joe Biden chooses a former IDF soldier to be the envoy for Lebanon, a country where the IDF is murdering people en masse. And he is saying we're working towards the deal under that model. Blinken goes to the Middle East and says, I am a Jew. I'm a Jew. And as I looked at it, I was like, why are you telling people that? They already know that. Meaning the only reason you would tell people that is put emphasis on that thing that you are announcing. And the only reason you put emphasis on it is to give people some context to where you're coming from and what your priorities are. I'm saying whether it's Hochstein or whether it's Blinken, they are not working in the best interests of America. They are working in the best interests of Israel. Joe Biden is perfectly okay with those policies, considering these are the people that he selected to go and do that. So there was never a fair deal. There was never an honest arbiter. Even in situations where Hamas was willing to accept the deal, Blinken would come back and lie and claim that the issue is Hamas, despite the fact that Hamas was like, we're willing to accept the deal, and was willing to do so for months on end. So whether it's the nuclear weapons thing, whether it's the lying about humanitarian aid, because that's another issue, if the people are not giving humanitarian aid, we are not supposed to be giving weapons and support. Blinken knew that they were lying about the aid. He knew that they were starving the population in the north in order to expel or get rid of that population. There's a reason why they were blowing up hospitals, why they were killing doctors, why they were killing journalists, why they were getting rid of mosques and infrastructure. The entire point is we want to get rid of any and everything here that is compatible with life. And when we remove everything here that is compatible with life, there is no way life can come back to this place because we've removed everything that is compatible with life. It's ethnic cleansing 101. That's exactly what they did. Now, our laws are supposed to come into play under that reality. And they were ignored fully. So, you know, it's clear as day that they're committing a genocide. The United Nations, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, the ICJ, all of these institutions have gone after Israel for this stuff, including potential prosecutions by the Hague or the International Criminal Court. You've had one UN body after the next that called it a genocide. They talked about starvation. They talked about sexual abuse. They talked about them being Palestinians used as human shields. They went through all of that stuff. And under no circumstances did our laws kick in to do what they were supposed to do under that model. We and this administration fundamentally ignored it all the way through. It is grotesque. And then they come to you and say, hey, we need you to vote for our guy. We need you to vote for our guy. There is that. Guys, we have come to the end. And I got to be honest, I am dragging ass. I'm dead tired. So, I am going to tell you, thank you for joining me today. I deeply appreciate it. And I also appreciate you guys joining me last night. I was up for a very, very long time. I got to be honest, I am totally dragging ass this morning. I'm probably going to go and take a nap. I'm going to make sure I find something to eat. Either way, I want to thank all of you for joining me. And I want to thank all of you for being with me as we covered this election. You may see me later today. I don't know. We'll play it by ear. But I will say like, share it. If you dig the content, subscribe to it. I'll be here Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. I had difficulty getting guests this morning, but Alan said yes. Margaret Kimberly said yes. And I wanted to try to get somebody for 8 o'clock, but I couldn't find anyone. Tomorrow, I'm going to have Scotty. She's coming on to discuss the election results. And I'm going to try to get a few other people as a panel. I enjoyed doing the panels last night, and I used to want to do more panels for fault lines, but I can never get a producer that would do their goddamn job on that issue. So there was that. By the same token, since I'm doing it, I'm going to do it right. And I am going to try to get more people and panels. I am also going to try to be able to take calls. That is something that I'm going to try to update also on the show. So, stay tuned. My name is Jamal Thomas. Like it, share it, subscribe to it, hit the notification bell. If you really dig the content, PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats, all of it is appreciated. All of it helps keep the content going and growing. The objective is 40,000 by Christmas. We're on our way. You guys have a phenomenal, phenomenal day. Jamal Thomas Show, signing off. Donald Trump, the new president-elect of the United States of America. Signing off.